This took place in November of 2005. Each year, my job would give us 10 vacation days. Seeing as I hadn't yet used any this year, I decided to take a week off to visit different states around the US. To get around, for the most part, I would actually hitchhike, which is something I've done multiple times in the past. Despite all the horrible recognition it gets nowadays, I actually really enjoy doing it. I've met a lot of people through hitchhiking that I still call friends to this day. Anyway, it was around 2:30 p.m. I was walking down the road giving the usual thumbs-up signal hitchhikers typically give. It had been a while since my last ride, and I'll be the first to admit I was getting a little desperate. Eventually, a red pickup truck pulled up next to me. Inside were two men. My best guess is they were in their 40 years old. One of them asked me where I was going, to which I responded. They both looked at each other for a second, then back at me, and signaled me to get in. They seemed normal enough, so I tossed my bag in the back, got in, and shut the door. But I quickly realized the whole floor of the vehicle was completely covered in different types of bullets. Before I had time to even rethink my decision, we were already going 60 down the highway. I tried to engage in some small talk to ease the tension, and it actually sort of worked. But somehow, the topic landed on how one of the guys had just gotten out of prison for aggravated assault. A disturbingly short amount of time later, they started asking me how much money I had. This is when I started to realize I could be in some serious danger. Now, I had been hitchhiking for a couple of days by that point. I didn't look the best, so I tried to play it off that I was homeless and had no money whatsoever. This response was met with complete silence. For the next 30 minutes or so, not a single word was said, though multiple times I would catch the driver looking up at me through the rearview mirror. I honestly just tried to ignore it, something I regret doing to this day. Fast forward 20 minutes, and to my horror, the driver turned off the highway and started down some unpopulated dirt road. I instantly shot up and said, dude, where are we going? After 15 seconds of no response while the car was still driving, I grabbed my bag, unlocked the door, and dove out of the car. Instantly, I looked up to see the red pickup slam on its brakes, shortly after followed by the reverse lights turning on. I cannot explain to you how fast I got up and ran into a nearby cornfield. I ran for 5 minutes when I swear I could hear gunshots behind me. They were clearly distant, but still, I ran for another 5 minutes until I reached the sign for the main highway. I then called the police, explained the situation in my current location, and waited in the cornfield until an officer arrived. I was then driven to the nearest police station, where I filed a police report. Though in terms of descriptions, there wasn't really much I had to give other than two men inside a red pickup truck. I hadn't gotten the license plate number, and I didn't even really see the full faces of the guys or even remember them. The whole situation was no doubt the scariest thing I've ever experienced. I don't completely know what those guys had planned, but I truly believe I could have lost my life that day. While I still hitchhike occasionally, I am now far more cautious in the cars I get into. I was still in college when this happened. I went to a big party school in upstate New York. I wasn't in a sorority, but I attended a lot of the frat parties still. I had a heavy drinking phase in college, unfortunately, but I guess it's good that I got it out of my system. There was an upcoming frat party that my friends Verity and Ellie wanted to go to. I was not one to ever say no to a party unless I was already deathly hungover, and even then, I'd sometimes be known to still go out. I was living in a house off campus with 3 other girls. We were not a sorority house or team house or anything like that, just four friends renting a house together. I believe it was a Adam Sandler party that we were going to. The house was about 20 minutes away from campus. We pre-gamed pretty heavily at our house and then called an Uber, which we all split. On the Uber ride there, we pre-gamed some more, which was a recipe for disaster. By the time we showed up to the party, I was borderline blacked out. I barely remember the layout of that house. I'd never been to a frat party besides that night. It's weird, I have short spans of memory from that night. I vaguely remember the outside, that there were a bunch of frat guys standing out front of the house, and then I remember the DJ in the living room and the 2 beer pong tables in the kitchen. I was later told that I played beer pong with some random frat guy and ended up talking to him in a corner for a big chunk of the night. But after that, nobody knows where I went. I couldn't even tell you the last thing I remember before waking up sleeping on the grass on the side of the road. In a daze, my head was throbbing. I had to still be somewhat intoxicated. It was pitch black outside. I was laying by a bunch of trees, like a wooded area apart from the university. There wasn't much up there besides woods and the occasional little town. There were a couple of light posts further down the road, so I wasn't just laying in complete darkness. I patted down my pockets looking for my phone and had a meltdown when I realized my pockets were empty. I was also missing my crossbody bag. I had absolutely nothing on me and started to freak out. I couldn't even call for help, let alone check the time or where I was. I looked around the immediate area by where I was sleeping, nothing. My white shirt was stained with dirt, but that was the least of my worries. I started walking down the road closer to the light posts and began to realize there were no buildings in sight. I was on some completely random back road. I leaned on the light pole for a few minutes, wondering what to do. I decided I'd wait for someone to pass by and ask for help. It took a long time, though at least 20 minutes, before I noticed headlights down the road. I stepped out onto the road, waving my arms and jumping, trying to ensure I got their attention. The cars slowed to a stop on the side of the road. I approached the car, and the guy inside rolled down the window. Once he asked me if I was all right, I told him I was stranded without a phone and needed a ride home. He told me to get in, and I did, making sure to let him know how much I appreciated it. He, of course, asked me about my predicament, how I found myself stranded on the side of the road. I told him I was at a party, and the next thing I remembered was waking up on the side of the road. In hindsight, I should not have said any of that. I should have been as vague as possible and not let this guy know that I got completely trashed and was vulnerable. He asked why I didn't call for help, and I told him I lost my cell phone too. I looked back at him for a second, and this was the first time I really analyzed his features. He was about 40, not the best-looking guy, with a thin goatee and a big nose. I gave him my address to put into his house as he drove. He put the address in, and then I heard him say under his breath, "Okay, here we go." I asked how far away we were, and he said about 15 minutes. That sounded about right since the frat house was about 15 minutes from our house. I thought things would go smoothly. I'd get dropped off at the house where Ellie and Verity would be waiting for me with my belongings. But nothing can ever go that smoothly. The man spoke in a gentle voice basically the entire time. He was asking basic questions. At first, his soft voice was almost, in a weird way, off-putting, like why was he talking in an almost whisper in the car? We drove on and on for what seemed like over 15 minutes on the same road. I started to get concerned and asked him how much further we had. He didn't respond right away, so I said, "Sir," and he went, "Hmm." I repeated my question, and he said in his soft voice, "Not far." This wasn't right. Our house is in town, yet we were still on the same back road with nothing but trees everywhere. I started noticing in my peripheral vision that he would look at me multiple times, like he'd move his whole head to stare at me for a few seconds and then look back at the road. I was starting to feel sick. I asked him if he put the right address in, and he said yes. Then he asked, "What color underwear are you wearing?" as he put his hand on my knee and started rubbing it. I moved it away and told him in a desperate voice to please not hurt me. I just wanted to get home safe. He said, "Why would I hurt you?" After saying this, he pulled onto the grass on the side of the road and put the car in park. He was about to lean over towards me and do something, like put his arms around me, but I didn't let him. I opened the door and ran into the woods. Luckily, I was wearing my Air Forces, so I didn't have a hard time running in the woods. I ran only just enough to be out of sight from the car. When I could no longer see its headlights, I heard the man for the first time raising his voice. He yelled into the woods, "Where you at?" "I just want to." I put my hands over my mouth, not only to muffle my breathing but because of pure fear. I waited and waited until I heard a car door slam shut and the sound of a car speeding off. I waited a few more moments before walking back to the road, confirming he was gone. I felt truly helpless. I didn't want to run into that man again, but I also needed someone else to help me. I waited just at the edge of the woods for another car to come, and eventually, one did. I saw the headlights approaching from afar, but I waited until I was sure it was a different car before jumping out and waving my arms and yelling. The car came to a stop. It was another man, a little older. I sat in the back seat. This time, I was so shaken up that I hardly spoke apart from answering whatever questions about my predicament he asked. Thankfully, this man dropped me off at the house. It was like 4 a.m. at this point. My friends were still awake waiting for me. They had my phone and my bag. They were contemplating calling the police if I didn't come back by morning. No one had any clue who I left with or how I ended up on the side of the road. The boy I was with claims he wasn't the one who left with me. In fact, there's no solid proof that I even left with anyone, but that leaves no explanation for how I ended up sleeping on the side of the road. I cut back heavily on the drinking after this night and never want to be in a situation again where I have to hitchhike. My friend Michael was throwing a house party. I arrived early to help set things up. I secured a spot to sleep in his parents' room, meaning I could drive to the party and drink without having to worry about driving home. His parents obviously weren't home for the night. Most of our close friends in our friend group came, plus a bunch of Michael's friends who I didn't know. The party was fun. At midnight, everyone screamed "Happy New Year" and cheered their drinks. After that, people slowly started circulating out, and the party started to quiet down as people went to either other parties, bars, or home. The later the night got, the more it became just the closer friends staying behind, until it just turned into a chill drinking session in the living room. This went on late into the night. It was likely 2:40 a.m. when the last of everyone who wasn't sleeping at Michael's house was gone. As it quieted down, we started hearing this occasional sound. At first, we didn't know what it was, but it soon started to sound like a creaking sound. It was dismissed as a sound from the fridge or something at first, which I know sounds stupid, but house appliances often make weird noises. It was just Michael, me, and Lloyd. Lloyd was falling asleep on the couch already. It was reaching that time where we were just going to go to sleep. However, eventually, we got so bothered by the noise that we had to search. We went to the kitchen, and it wasn't coming from in there. We realized when we were close to the basement door that it was coming from downstairs. Michael opened the door, and we heard this creaking sound. "Go check what it is," I said. He kept saying, "No way." Then he called down into the basement, "Yo, who's down there?" The creaking stopped, and we never heard it again. After a solid minute of waiting at the top of the stairs, we agreed to go down together. We both grabbed knives, drunkenly thinking that was a good idea, when in reality, we were so drunk we'd probably only hurt ourselves with them. We got to the bottom of the stairs and looked through the entire basement. It's not huge, it just has a couch, TV, a bar, a table in the corner, and various old pieces of junk. It was pretty messy at the time. The first thing we did was search any possible crevice for someone who could be hiding. Then we tried to figure out what could have been making that sound. I noticed a rocking chair, and so I went up to it, sat in it, and then started rocking in it. It made the exact same creaking sound we had been hearing. Michael and I looked at each other. I stood up, and so did every hair on my body. I don't think we ever ran faster than we did when we ran up those stairs and slammed the door shut. We tried to come up with any logical explanation, but there was none. He kept the basement door locked for days until his parents came back. There was no living soul down there, but something was moving that rocking chair. That rocking chair used to belong to his grandma, who passed away forever ago, and it's just something his mom held on to for sentimental reasons. I can't say I've ever experienced anything resembling the paranormal before this, nor since then. It still sends chills down my spine. Around 8 years ago, I moved out of my mom's house into my first apartment in the city of Chicago. The place was a nice 3-bedroom apartment on the south side of the city in a friendly neighborhood by the University of Illinois. I lived with 2 roommates, Patrick and Kelsey. Kelsey was a good friend of mine, while Patrick was a good friend of Kelsey's who I had not met prior, although we ended up getting along just fine. One night, about a month after moving in, I met up with a few friends of mine for drinks at a bar more in the center of the city, around 15 minutes from my place. It was a good time, and I ended up getting slightly drunk before getting into a cab at 1 a.m. and heading home. Upon walking into my apartment, I noticed that Patrick's door was open, showing that he was staying at his girlfriend's place, while Kelsey's door was closed with the light from his TV shining underneath the crack. I made my way to my bedroom and put on my own TV before lying down to prepare for sleep. After around 10 minutes, I heard my doorbell ring. Half asleep, I woke up, confused as it was 1:30 in the morning, so I ignored it. A few seconds later, the doorbell rang again, and then again a few seconds after that. It's important to mention that my roommate Kelsey had a good amount of side cash by dealing weed to a few people. He was also a huge stoner himself, so the idea that he fell asleep while waiting for a late-night customer to come over was not out of the realm of possibility. With this in mind, I went over to my intercom and asked who was there. A girl's voice answered back, "It's Kaylee." "I'm here to see Kelsey." Thinking that my suspicions had been confirmed, I exited out of my front door and headed down the stairs. The door to the outside of our apartment building was made of tall glass, so you could easily identify any potential visitors. Here, I saw an attractive college-age blonde girl with glasses waiting patiently outside. I had never seen this person before, however, she appeared to be non-threatening. Besides having random customers over to grab weed, Kelsey would also have some random girls over to hook up with from time to time. Because of this, I let my guard down slightly and cracked the door open. The girl then repeated what she had said moments earlier over the intercom, "Hi, I'm here to see Kelsey." I replied, "Okay, he's here. Just follow me up," and I held the door open for her. She grabbed the handle, and I turned around to head back up the stairs. As I was walking back up, I quickly noticed that this Kaylee girl was not following me up. I glanced over my shoulder and saw that she was still standing outside holding the door open, only now she was staring off to her right, almost as if waiting for someone. At this moment, a tidal wave of fear crashed over me as I realized something horrible was more than likely about to happen. I continued walking up to my place, quicker now. After turning the corner of the stairs, I heard the door swing open and then heavy footsteps running up the stairs behind me. I looked over my shoulder again, and what I saw shook me to my core. A tall, gangly man with sunken-in eyes and greasy long hair down to his shoulders was running up the stairs straight at me. He was wearing a sleeveless black t-shirt, and apart from the cheap-looking tribal tattoos I saw creeping up his arms, I noticed he was also holding what looked like a lead pipe in his right hand. At this moment, my body shot full of adrenaline as I turned around and raced back up the stairs and into my apartment. I turned around to close the door and saw the man, who was now only a few feet from entering my apartment, the pipe over his head. With less than a second to spare, I slammed the door and locked it in one swift motion. Immediately after, I heard the thud of the pipe hit my door. I stood facing the now closed door, paralyzed, as the man hit the door 3 more times while shouting obscenities at me. He eventually gave up and ran down the stairs and out the front door. I ran into Kelsey's room to wake him up. After telling him what exactly had just gone down, he responded by telling me that, yes, he knew a blonde girl named Kaylee, only he had just met her earlier the same day. Apparently, while I was out with my friends, the doorbell rang while Kelsey was home alone. Instead of going down to let her in himself, Kelsey buzzed her up after just hearing her name, thinking she was a friend of mine. When she reached the door to our unit, he opened it and let her in. He said it seemed like she was confused, mentioning that she was looking for someone named Felix. Kelsey responded by saying his own name and that no one named Felix lived here. He mentioned she stayed near the entrance of the unit and kept reaching behind her to make sure the door stayed open before leaving only a few moments later. After hearing this, my theory is that these same people came earlier in the day and, not expecting to have someone just let them up through the buzzer, the girl made the mistake of forgetting to keep the door to the building open, rendering the attacker unable to enter during this first attempt. Either way, we both got extremely lucky that night. We did call the police, who arrived and asked for more information about what happened. They asked if there was anyone we knew who might want to do us harm, and we answered no, which was the truth, as this seemed to be a completely random attack. The cops left soon after, saying that there was nothing much they could do. We never saw that Kaylee girl or her scumbag partner again. It all started on a rainy night. My dad had wanted me to babysit my little brothers while he went to the bar to play pool and drink. I'd gotten them to settle down for the night and I decided to go order some food and chill, playing some CS while I waited. About 30 minutes had gone by and I was wondering why the hell my food was taking so long. I finally heard a knock on my door and there was a rough-looking man who said he had my food. I tipped him and he went on his way. I closed the door and walked back to my computer, completely forgetting to lock it. If one of my protective friends hadn't said something while we were gaming, things might have gone a lot worse. Them asking to make sure I locked the door was a potential life-saving question, because in fact, I had completely forgotten to lock the door. To me, it wasn't the biggest deal at the time, but I'm glad they said something and you'll see why here in a minute. I checked on the door to make sure it was locked, and of course, it wasn't. So I locked the door real quick and went back to gaming. My computer, by the way, was in my living room, and to the right of me was my kitchen. In the kitchen, there was a giant bay window facing directly into where I was sitting and gaming. I started eating my food while gaming, and I heard my front door knob jiggle. I thought maybe I was just scared and hallucinating it since I was home alone and my brothers were asleep in bed, until my dog started barking at the front door. That was the exact moment I realized that something bad was happening. Whoever was there started banging and rattling the door handle. Freaked out, I ducked under the counter beside me, called my dad, and then called 911. While I was on the phone, my little brothers ran out of their room screaming that someone was standing outside their bedroom window, pointing towards the lock, and smiling and waving at them, trying to get them to open it for him. I completely lost it and started crying, but I had to hide my brothers in my room, in my closet, and I told them to not come out at all. I thought he was going to try the back door next, which was a glass door that he could have easily rocked back and forth to get the lock loose or even just shattered the door completely. All it would really take to break it was an object to swing at it, like a metal bat or something. So I was freaking out. I grabbed a knife and waited for my dad and the police to show up for what felt like forever. I was scared that I was going to have to defend my little brothers and myself in a life or death scenario. I was only 13 at the time, so I was really scared. The cops finally showed up, and the person had disappeared. But every night after that, I was scared he would come back and we would finally meet. I have no idea if it was someone random or the Chinese food delivery driver from earlier. I just hoped he would never come back. Luckily, he never did. But that didn't stop me from being scared shitless every night, especially when I was home alone. It's especially creepy when you think about how us kids were alone. I think he knew that and he was trying to prey on us, but luckily he gave up. Hopefully, he heard me calling the police or something, and that's why he ran. I guess we'll never really know for sure. It's all too hard to say, but I've been thinking about it non-stop for a while now, and I'm still paranoid. This happened in August of last year. I had taken a week off from work for a staycation at home. I had been living alone for the past few months after my roommate moved out, but I'd been working too much to really enjoy the space and freedom of living alone. This week was supposed to be my relaxing, me time that I never got to have. Unfortunately, it could not have been further from that. It was my second day off, and I was just chilling, watching TV, eating nice home-cooked meals, all of that kind of stuff, when I heard someone walk up to my front porch. It was midday, so I thought maybe the mailman or just some solicitor. But as I stayed sitting on the couch for a few minutes, I realized they still hadn't knocked or rang the doorbell. I never heard them walk away, so it got me curious. I got up and went over to the door to look out the peephole. Sure enough, someone was still on my porch. It was a man looking to be in his mid-30s, wearing a light sweatshirt and black jeans. He wasn't in front of the door, though. He was off to the side, looking around like he was searching for something. I thought of opening the door, but I was too nervous to confront him, so I just watched. After 40 seconds, the guy walked away quickly and got into a parked car on the road by my neighbor's house. Once I saw him drive away, I went out to investigate. Everything looked normal to me, at least everything in the area the man was looking around. I went back inside and mostly forgot about it. Within the hour, I took a nap, then made dinner a few hours later, and finally turned on a movie to finish off the night with. Sometime in the middle of it, there was a knock at the door. I paused the movie and went to see who it was. It was that man from earlier, this time standing in front of the door and seeming to be waiting for me to answer. I cracked the door open just enough to talk through. "Hey, I was hoping you'd help me out with something. I'd ask someone else, but nobody would answer. The man said right away with a big smile. "What do you need?" I asked. He went on to tell me this elaborate story about his car. Breaking down right next to my house, he pointed at it, and I immediately knew it was the same car I saw him drive away in earlier. Then he said all he needed was to use my phone to make a quick call. Knowing this was some sort of scam or something, I denied him right away and closed the door. I then looked through the peephole to make sure he left, but he didn't. His face grew excessively angry, and he banged on the door again. I yelled through the door that I'd call the cops if he didn't leave. He stood and thought for a moment, then hurried off, but not to his car. He walked around to the left side of the house. Fearing this was going to escalate, I dialed 911 and told them about the situation. Thank God I did, because not even a minute later, a sudden crash came from the dining room. I ran over to see what it was and saw that he'd smashed the window and was crawling through it. I tried to run for the garage to get in my car, but the man was quick, chasing me down half the house before grabbing me and holding me still. I fought back, kicking and punching, but he completely overpowered me. He told me through his clenched jaw to be quiet and insisted that I stop fighting while he dragged me to the front door and opened it. Once I knew what he was doing, I only started fighting harder. As he tried to bring me closer to his car, someone walking their dog on the other side of the road saw us and came running over. Before he even reached us, the man let go of me and sprinted to his car and drove away. It all happened so fast. Once the police arrived, they helped calm me down and got all the information I could give them. Apparently, it wasn't enough, though. He was never found. What's creepier is that the police think the first time I saw him come by wasn't actually his first time. They think I may have caught him collecting some sort of camera or mic he'd set up on my house to spy on me. He hasn't been back that I know of, but I plan to move out anyway just to be safe. Whatever his plan was, I don't want to risk finding out. I live in a townhome in the middle of a relatively small city. It's very small and outdated, but I live alone, so it's the best I can afford. I worked late this night, getting home sometime around 8 or 9. Pulling up my shared driveway, I noticed the townhome connected to mine had its front door wide open. All the lights in the house were off, though, which made me think they must have accidentally left it open and then gone to sleep. I made fun of them in my head and went inside my house, not thinking much else about it. I got out some frosted flakes and ate while watching Netflix, then forced myself to go to bed because I had to be up early for my morning shift tomorrow. Going to my bedroom, which happened to have a connecting wall to my neighbors, I heard a few thumps come from inside their place. My neighbors usually don't make any noise, so hearing anything from them was a rare occurrence. I just hoped they wouldn't keep me up and turned off the lights and hopped in bed. I laid there with my eyes closed for several minutes, trying to drift into sleep when the most terrifying sound instantly shook me up, my front door being smashed in. It was a single violent hit. I jumped out of bed and ran into the hallway. There was wood debris all over the floor, and the front door was wide open. But whoever did it must have been moving quickly because they weren't there. I heard some footsteps running through the living room, and at this point, I could tell there was more than one person. I tried to run back to my bedroom, but a man screamed at me to stop. I turned to face two large men, both wearing masks and hoodies. One was holding a baseball bat, and the other held some sort of metal ramming tool, which must have been used to bust open the door. This next part was chaotic as they yelled commands at me and forced me to the ground. I didn't even try to fight back because I knew it would only put me in more danger. One of them held me down aggressively, pressing my head on the floor, while the other went around the house and shoved stuff in his backpack. I was panicking, breathing heavily, and trying to convince them to get off me and just let me stay out of their way. I probably should have just shut up and stayed quiet, but it was hard to think straight. Somewhere around 2 to 3 minutes in, the man that was grabbing stuff came running back to the hallway, yelling at me and the other guy about something outside. The man got off me and ran over to the window. Then they both came running back and pushed me down as I was trying to get up. They looked full of rage as they started attacking and threatening me before trying to run out the back door, but they were too late. For cops had surrounded the house, and seconds later, they forced the men to give up. As it turns out, the men broke into my neighbor's townhome too. They weren't home at the time, but when they pulled in, they immediately called the cops, which was how they were able to help me. The two men turned out to be just regular guys trying to make some quick money. Aside from the smashed front door and a few bruises, I was all right. I still think it was stupid of them to attack me instead of just making a run for it at the end, but I'm sure either way they were screwed. It was by far the most terrifying thing I'd ever been through, but I'm extremely lucky to have had it end up the way it did, with them in prison. My friend Basil and I rent a house together. He's a pretty big partier, though, and often stays out really late or even sleeps over at others' places, so a lot of nights I have to myself. This was one of those nights where Basil was out at the club or something. So, having the night alone, I brought out a couple cans of beer to our front porch and sat on the swinging bench we had set up. It was nice weather out, and with it being nearly midnight, most people were sleeping, and the neighborhood was pretty quiet. After being out for a little less than an hour, a person came walking down the street in front of the houses. He looked like a large guy and had a sweatshirt on with a hood over his head, but something was off about the way he was walking. He was very stiff, like only his legs were moving, and his whole upper half wasn't. When he got up to the part of the road my house was in front of, he stopped and looked over at me. I waited a few seconds for him to say something, but he didn't say anything. He just stood there in the middle of the road, right in front of my house, and looked at me. "Hey buddy, you need something?" He stayed quiet for a moment, then started walking up my driveway. I stood up from the bench and yelled at him to leave, but once I realized he was getting pretty close, I hurried inside and locked the door behind me. I then watched out the peephole as the guy came right up to the door. He waited for another second before pulling out something from under his sweatshirt. It was hard to see from the small view I had, but it looked like maybe a hammer or crowbar or something. Once I saw that, I knew what was likely about to happen. I ran upstairs and locked myself in the bedroom, dialing 911 and trying to be quiet. I could hear the wood splintering off the door downstairs as I pleaded with the operator for help. Then there was a loud thud and silence. The broken door swaying on its hinges was the only sound. I waited anxiously, only assuming that I'd hear the guy's footsteps approaching the bedroom door at any second. But seconds turned to minutes until I heard a cop car pull into my driveway. I thought about running down to the officers, but the operator suddenly told me through the phone to stay where I was and wait for the cops to get to me. So, I sat back down. 30 seconds later, I heard one of the officers walking up the stairs, followed by them shouting and firing off a taser. The guy had been standing right outside the bedroom door, as if he was just waiting for me to open it. He was arrested and apparently was very drunk, but I have no clue who he was or why he did what he did. As far as the officers have told me, the guy wouldn't even say why he was walking down the road or what he was even doing there. All I know is if I had opened that door, it would have been the last thing I ever did. I'm an only child and grew up in a small town. My parents were hardworking, often struggled to pay the bills, so they usually worked a lot of overtime or even had multiple jobs. Because of this, I was left home alone pretty frequently. I was 13 at the time, and this night both my mom and dad were working closing shifts, so I was at home by myself after school until 10 or 11. To keep myself busy, I'd usually watch TV or go for walks in the woods behind our house. After getting home from school and having a snack, I went outside and started walking along my regular path while the sun was still out. It was a 2.5 mile trail through the woods that almost never had anyone else walking on it. Strangely though, about a mile into the walk, I saw a guy on the trail up ahead. He was sitting with his back against a tree, wearing a dark blue jacket and had a red baseball cap tilted downward, covering his eyes and most of his face. From the way he was slumped over, it almost looked like he was sleeping. So I continued walking, trying to quietly pass by him. As I got just a couple of feet away, though, he lifted his head and instantly locked eyes with me. His eyes were tired and red, and he had this disturbing frown like he was upset or something. As I passed by, he started standing up, and getting a strange feeling about him, I began walking faster, basically jogging the rest of the trail and back home. I didn't see him follow me, but I locked all the doors just in case. Again, I was only 13, and even though I was used to being home alone, I still got scared pretty easily. I stayed inside and checked the windows one last time before trying to distract myself by watching TV. Only a few minutes after turning it on, though, I heard a voice at the back door. I paused the TV and listened, hearing a man call out multiple times, repeating the word, "Hello." I stood up and looked down the main hallway. That same guy with the red cap and blue jacket was standing at the back door, almost pressing his face into it as he tried to look inside. I quickly went back around the corner, but he must have seen me because he immediately stopped calling out and instead started trying to force the door open. I just froze up in the middle of the living room, listening to the door jolt back and forth against the lock. After several attempts, though, he left. I called my parents, and they called the police, but he was never found. Having been followed home and them trying to break in, though, I can only imagine what they were trying to do to me. It was the middle of the summer. I was 11 years old and my younger brother was 8. We were outside playing various games with other kids in our neighborhood, but we finally headed home as the sun went down. Maybe once a week, our parents would go to a different restaurant around town, leaving my younger brother and me home alone. Most of the time, they'd tell us before they went out, but if we were outside playing, sometimes they'd just leave us to our game. When we got back home and no one was there, we assumed this was the case. Confirming this was a note left on the kitchen counter. My younger brother and I both went to the living room to watch TV, something we usually did before bed. After half an hour, it had gotten completely dark outside. Just then, I heard the doorbell ring, followed by knocking. At first, I thought it was our parents getting back, but it definitely wasn't normal for them to use the front door, much less not have a key for it. The chances of the garage door opener they had not working and them forgetting a key were extremely low. Although I realized it was still possible, I left the living room and went up to the front door to see who it was. As I approached the door, I heard a man's voice yell that he was selling Girl Scout cookies. I was extremely confused considering the time of day. I looked through the peephole and saw a grown man, completely alone, with no cookies in hand and not with his daughter, as I was expecting. The man yelled out once more before moving his hand to the door handle. My heart dropped, realizing that we had forgotten to lock the door when coming in for the night. The door handle slowly started turning, and I quickly engaged the deadlock. A clicking sound echoed out. It was too loud. Clearly, the man had heard it and now knew someone was inside. I waited a minute before once again looking through the peephole. The man was now looking through our living room window directly at my younger brother, who was completely unaware of what was going on. From where he now stood, I could make out a gun holstered on the left side of his waist. I ran back to the living room and closed the blinds. I told my brother we should get some ice cream downstairs in the basement. I needed to get him away from any windows, but I knew that if he knew what was going on, he would freak out. He agreed, and we went downstairs. I silently locked the basement door behind us. We ate our ice cream, and eventually, I could hear the hum of the garage door opening from upstairs, signifying that my parents were back home. Later, when my brother wasn't around, I told them what had happened. They were horrified and understandably called the police. The police inspected the place, and one of the first things they noticed was how the front door's lock had clearly been tampered with, basically confirming the man had ill intent and was trying to break in. What he planned to do when he got inside, though, I can't say for sure, and neither can the police. The man was never identified. To this day, my younger brother doesn't even know this whole event took place. My junior year in college, I had a strange experience. First, a few background details. My dorm room was attached to my roommate's, so I had to go out through hers to get to the bathroom or the hallway. She was a light sleeper, but I wasn't the type to be out late, so it didn't matter. I had 2 normal operations in my life at that time and discovered that while under anesthesia, I would wake up briefly toward the end before I was supposed to. If I got a mosquito bite, I had to deal with it for at least a month. I'm not a fast healer. One night, I had the most vivid dream of my life. I woke up briefly somewhere else and then went right back to sleep. In this dream, I looked left, I looked right, and then I passed back out, just like if I was in surgery. I was on a hospital gurney, slightly inclined, facing the wall. There was ambient noise behind me, and the echo suggested it was a very large room. There was nothing sinister about the noises. On either side of me was a row of empty hospital gurneys. At my feet, just to my right, 2 people were having a conversation sitting on a bench against the wall. One was a person in a dark suit, the other, I don't know what it was. It was small, and I saw its hands, which appeared to have darker, grayish skin. They were speaking together, so animated and excited, like 2 old friends who hadn't seen each other in years, and they didn't notice me wake up. I didn't recognize the dialogue. Though I don't speak German, Mandarin, Russian, etc., I can recognize them when I hear them. This language was wholly unrecognizable, yet the person in the suit was fluent. I went back to sleep. In the morning, I said to myself that that was a messed up dream and went to the shower. As I passed my roommate, who was still in bed, she asked, "Where did you go last night?" I thought that was odd. After my shower, I started to put my makeup on and noticed something on my face. I leaned closer and could not believe what I saw, 2 perfectly parallel lines, impossibly thin and impossibly perfect. There was some clear hard gel on the top, and that's what I felt. There was no blood. My own hair was thicker than the width of the cuts, yet I could see down into my skin a little. This was 1996. I had never seen anything like this. These days, I would say it was a laser cut topped with liquid Band-Aid, but neither of those things seemed prevalent in those days. I said, "Okay, there's an explanation. I slept on a staple or a paperclip. I do homework in my bed all the time. I went and scoured my pillow for anything sharp and found nothing. So, I got my sewing needle, a staple from some homework, and a paper clip. I dunked them in hydrogen peroxide and made cuts on my face similar to what was there. Immediately, blood welled up, and the skin was jagged from all three objects, and the width of all cuts was thicker than the laser cuts. I determined that nothing in my room could have made the cuts. I didn't have an X-Acto knife, but I knew the blood would well up the same way if I did. I skipped my first class as I tried to figure out what to do. I kept obsessively feeling my face all day, in awe of the perfection of what was there and how it could have come to be. There were only 2 people on campus rich enough to have a digital camera, which meant I would have to borrow a friend's 35mm because I didn't have my own. That meant I would have to explain myself to my friend and possibly the photo shop when the pictures came back. Who would I even give the photos to? Who would I even contact, and what would I tell them? In those days, if you even said the word alien, you were a pariah. After hours of mental debates sitting on the edge of my bed, I gave up thinking about it and finished my classes for the day. I sat on the edge of my bed into the night, debating, unsure of what to do. In the wee hours of the morning, I woke up. The cuts were gone, completely healed, no trace of even a scar. I was disturbed for a few days, but then I eventually forgot about it. A few years after graduating, I decided I was going to have some dental work done and went to 2 different offices to get quotes. They both took a full facial X-ray. I had long since forgotten my crazy dream and the cuts until I sat down across from the first X-ray technician and pointed to a strange thing showing up above my teeth. I asked if I was looking at a mirror image because it was on the same side as my cuts had been rather than the opposite side. No, I was told, the X-ray was actual, not a mirror image, so the right side of the image corresponded with the right side of my face. I pointed to the almost square image above my teeth and asked what that was. "It's just an X-ray anomaly," he said. He didn't seem bothered by it. I figured that meant there was some damage or irregularity with the X-ray plates and let it go. Then I went to the second dentist, an orthodontist, and had another X-ray done. You guessed it, the square was there in the exact same place. This time, I didn't even try to make polite small talk or beat around the bush. I pointed to the square and said, "What is that?" This time, the tech looked at me funny and said, "It's an X-ray anomaly," and she leaned closer and whispered, "We see them all the time," in a way that gave me goosebumps. This was in Spokane, Washington. I didn't know what else to say, so I said nothing. Could it be that whatever negatives or plates or whatever they used for an X-ray were damaged in exactly the same spots and exactly the same shape? Maybe, I guess. I don't know much about X-rays. But after that, I reflected on my situation. I don't feel freaked out, but I think there might be something in my face put there by somebody else. Here's what I know. We do this all the time to other species. We chase them in helicopters, shoot at them with tranquilizer darts, take rectal temperatures, take blood samples, stamp radio tags in their ears with no regard to if it hurts or the trauma of the event, or if their furry buddies will ostracize them later because they have something funky on their ear. In my situation, I was clearly well cared for, if it really happened at all. Someone was there as some kind of representative on my behalf. I was handled in such a way that if I didn't have a weird metabolism, I wouldn't have known what even happened. I never once felt pain. My cut healed instantly. If this is some kind of research-driven radio tag for the purposes of data collection or preservation of habitat or species, like we would do, they did it with far more regard for me than we have for other species on our own planet. I don't know what might happen if I get another X-ray 20 years later. I have tried to look when I go through airport security if anything shows up on the image we see in the booth, but I don't see anything. Surprisingly, I'm okay with this. I think it might just be science and nothing nefarious or evil. I wish my consent to be asked first, but I suppose it's hard to ask for consent when you're not even supposed to exist. This is the story of my freshman year in college. I went to a smaller university, there were only a few thousand students that attended it, so the campus wasn't very large. But I liked that about this place. However, my first year I had to live in the dorms to save a little bit of money and maybe make a friend. I chose to have a random roommate. This decision backfired. I didn't know anybody at the college when I got there, and the first person that I met was the roommate. He told me that his name was Dermot. Dermot was a strange guy overall. He was rude, unfriendly, and he never left the room other than to go to class. He was not at all the type of person that I would normally hang out with, and by the second week, I had given up all hope of being friends with him. I had a TV and a PS4 that I brought with me to school, and Dermot said that I could never use it because it bothered him. He also demanded that all lights be off after dark. I tried to reason with him once, but he threatened to report me to the dean of students. I wasn't scared by the threat. I didn't really think they would do anything. But I would rather just try to get along with my roommate instead. I would do my studying in class buildings around campus. I made other friends at college pretty quickly, and when I was talking with them about Dermot one day, they suggested that I get a new room. I hadn't even realized this was an option until they told me, so I put in a request to get my own solo dorm room. I was told that when one came available, they would contact me. About 2 weeks later, so now about a month and a half into the school year, I was contacted. I was told that I could move into a different dorm building that was across the street. This building was a little bit newer and nicer. It had a room that was available, and I accepted it. I decided not to even tell Dermot. I didn't know if he would be happy or sad about it, but I didn't want him thinking that I hated him or something. So one day, when Dermot was gone at his classes at a time that I didn't have class, I packed up all my stuff and just left without saying a word. My entire half of the room was now gone. I moved into my new building and got my new room. It was so nice to finally have a place all to myself. I could watch TV, play PlayStation, and not have any complaints. I could even have my friends over to hang out. However, I did want to be careful not to see my old roommate Dermot. Like I said, it was a small campus, so there was a chance that we would cross paths. If we did, I didn't want him to ask me why I left or something. I was careful to avoid him, and I didn't see him at all for a couple of days. As for my new room, at first it was great, but on probably the second or third night that I was there, something happened. I was playing video games late at night, and I heard somebody try to open my door. It was locked, so it didn't open. After a few seconds, I got up to look out of my peephole. When I was walking towards the door, I heard somebody knock on it. There weren't even that many people that knew I lived here yet, so I found this to be really strange. When I got to the door, I saw Dermot standing there. I did not want to answer it, and I quietly moved away from the door. He knocked one more time, and I didn't answer that either. I was really creeped out. I mean, how did he even know that I lived here? I didn't tell him, and I wasn't friends with him on Snapchat or anything where he could see my location. This was really strange. I went back and looked like 15 minutes later, and he was finally gone. I didn't know why he came here. There was no reason that I could think of. Well, the next morning I got up and had to go to class. When I left my room, I walked down a couple of hallways to get to the front of the building. In one of the hallways was a sort of lounge study area. When I was approaching it, I saw Dermot sitting in one of the chairs there. I couldn't believe that he was in my dorm building. He didn't live here. I didn't know what he was doing. I turned around and left out of another exit. I thought maybe he was following me. It was really, really strange. Later on in that same day, I was walking on campus, and I happened to notice him again. There were a lot of other people walking around, and I saw him a ways behind me. I walked back to my dorm building, and he seemed to almost follow me there. He wasn't walking close enough to follow me inside or anything, but I was very suspicious when I noticed. I got back in my building and was wondering what this guy's problem was. Well, that same night he was back at my room once more. I was up late, and he tried entering. It was locked like always, and he then knocked on the door. This time it was louder than before. I didn't answer, but was watching him through the peephole. He knocked again very loudly, but I still did nothing. When he knocked for a third time, I remember somebody else who lived down the hall opened up their door. They told him to quiet down. Dermot didn't say anything. Then he stood there for probably a minute. After that, he backed up a step and then kicked my door extremely loud and hard. I was honestly afraid that the door might break, but it didn't. Dermot then turned and stormed off. After this, I made up my mind that I was going to report him, and the next day I did. Somebody must have talked to him or something because I stopped seeing him after that, and he did not return to my room. I was still very suspicious that he would follow me around or show up again or something for like a month, but luckily he didn't. A while after this, I met somebody that used to know him. They weren't really his friend, but had several classes with him. They told me that he had dropped out and also said that his name wasn't even Dermot. None of these things really surprised me. I'm not sure why he gave me a fake name, but he was a weird guy. Looking back, I'm really glad that I moved out when I did. Back when I got my first adult job after college, I moved into a smaller house with a roommate. The roommate was a girl that I went to high school with, and her and I were in the same grade. However, we weren't really friends. We both knew of each other but didn't have the same friend groups. I didn't know much about her, but somehow after college, we found ourselves living in the same city. We had been friends on Facebook or something, and because we both lived there and didn't know anybody else, we decided to try to become friends and live together. We were both female, the same age, and figured that it would work out, but I was wrong about that. At first, she seemed cool. I honestly forgot where she worked, but she had pretty normal hours like I did. Our bedrooms were the only two in the house and next to each other in the hallway. We were not best buddies or anything, but we got along good at first. However, she seemed to have sort of strange behavior. I remember noticing her leaving and coming home at all kinds of odd hours all the time. I would wake up to hearing her leaving or coming home. I was a light sleeper, and the times would be anywhere from midnight to 5 a.m. I had no idea where she would be going or why, and this happened at least several times a week. One time I brought it up, asking why she was leaving at 2 a.m. She flat out denied it and said that I must have heard the neighbor. I didn't tell her I knew it was her because I realized that whatever it was, she didn't want me to know. I didn't really think too much of it for the most part, though. But one night, several months into living there, I was out late. I was with some other friends, and I got back home at probably almost midnight. After arriving back at the house, I went inside, and all of the lights were off. I turned on some lights and also noticed that my roommate's door was open and she did not appear to be inside. I called out her name, just wondering if she was home. I figured that she was gone again when she didn't answer. Then I went into my bedroom, changed, and got in bed. I was tired, but after closing my eyes, for some reason, I had a hard time getting to sleep. I laid there for probably 20 minutes trying to rest, but it was like I wasn't tired anymore. Then suddenly I heard this noise inside of my room. I had no idea what it was. I looked up and saw my closet door opening. Then I saw my roommate walking out. It was really dark in there, but I could clearly tell that it was her. This was so strange. I had no idea what she was doing in there. I sat up and asked her what was going on. As soon as I spoke, she looked over and saw me, then she started running and darted out of my room. I stayed where I was and was just so confused. Then, probably a minute later, I heard her leaving the house out the front door. At that point, I decided that I needed to move out of there as soon as possible. For the next couple of days, I packed up my stuff. I don't know where my roommate was during this time, but she was never there when I was. She must have only been back when I was at work. Then I moved out. After that, I haven't spoken to her since. She blocked me on social media, and I still don't know why she was hiding in the closet in my room. She probably didn't expect me to get home when I did. That's why her door was open and she was in my room. She must have had to hide in my closet and waited until she thought I was sleeping to try to leave the room. I'm glad that I couldn't sleep, though, and that I noticed her. That was by far the creepiest roommate experience I've ever had. Creepy carnival workers. So this happened when I was younger, quite a while ago, but it's one of the creepiest things that has ever happened to me, and I thought y'all might like to hear it. Anyways, I was probably about 10 or 11 years old, and my mom dropped me and my younger brother off at this little carnival thing in the supermarket parking lot. I don't know if they really do stuff like that anymore, but they used to set up smaller carnivals with maybe like 10 rides and a couple of food vendors. Anyways, we had been there for maybe an hour, and I noticed that this guy had been watching us for a while. Then I realized that he was sort of following us around to the different rides. I figured he was one of the workers since he was wearing a carnival hat and his clothes were pretty much the same colors as the other people working there. I would look around and spot him watching us from a couple of rides over or standing next to one of the food stands. Now, I don't want to be rude, but this guy had the creepiest freaking face. One of his eyes looked like it had been swallowed up by this huge swollen eyelid. He had these chapped lips that looked like they were bleeding in places, and he just kept following us around for like 30 minutes, mumbling to himself and staring. After a while, I decided that we should leave and find a way to call my mom. As we were about to leave the carnival area, literally about to walk through the exit, this guy hollers to both of us and grabs my brother's shoulder to pull him back in. He started telling us that we're too young to be there alone and asking where our parents are. I mean, I was young, but there were tons of kids there even younger than us without their parents. He pulled us off to the side area between two rides and pushed us behind him, then just stood guard in front of us like that. I kept asking to use a phone to call my mother since I was still hoping it was actually about us being too young to be there by ourselves. Finally, he gives me this phone that obviously has no SIM card in it or something because it just displays that error message that old phones used to have. I kept begging him to let us go, and he kept muttering, "No, we're going to take you somewhere real safe, real safe." Then he starts laughing and asked if my mom had picked up, which obviously not, and saying he's going to have to take us himself since there's no one else to take us whatever that he had planned. Finally, we see another worker walking by and I yell to her if I can use her phone. The guy immediately freezes and then just starts walking away like nothing happened. I explained to the woman what had happened and she just looked really confused and kind of worried. I didn't find out until a couple years later, but I guess she told my mom that she didn't think the guy even worked there, that she had never seen him before in her time working. So that happened. Every year our small town has a fairly popular carnival and rodeo. It's pretty much the only thing anyone around here looks forward to, or Lowe's, considering how many drunk tourists seem to find their way here and make fools of themselves dressing like cowboys. One night during the carnival 2 years ago, my mom decided to take my brother, myself, and 2 of my friends for the night to have some fun. We ended up parking on a residential street a few blocks away from the fairgrounds because there's no parking pretty much anywhere else. After a half-ass attempt at remembering the name of the street and the general area where we left our car, we all went on our way. Well, later that night, we couldn't remember for the life of us exactly where the car was. We searched street after street for 30 minutes with no luck. Finally, my mom, after seeing how tired we all were, told us to sit on the curb and wait while she went and looked. We were all well aware of stranger danger and were in a nice neighborhood, plus the community rarely has problems with violence of any sort, so we 3 15-year-old girls and 1 12-year-old boy thought there was nothing to worry about. 5 minutes after my mom disappeared, we hear the grass crunching on the lawn behind us, and all of us whip around to see who was now standing there. An older, lanky man with a hunchback and the coldest expression I'd ever seen was staring at us. Because his back was hunched, he stood there kind of crookedly. He didn't move or blink as he glared at us. "Why are you sitting on my curb?" he snapped, still not moving. It was unnerving how still he was. We immediately felt guilty, thinking this was just some scared or confused old man wondering why some teenagers were sitting outside of his house. I explained the situation to him, that my mom had gone to find our car and we would move across the street if we were bothering him. He stayed silent for a few seconds, then stared me down and said, "Come inside." The next few minutes are a blur as my adrenaline kicked in, and I was getting more and more scared of this man by the second. We didn't have the sense to just run. For some reason, he kept repeating, "Come inside." "What are you waiting for? Come inside my house. Get over here now. Get in my house." No matter what we said, he didn't seem to hear, and he thankfully didn't move from his spot on the lawn, like he just expected us to come with him. He was especially focused on my friend and me, just telling us over and over again to go with him inside his house. No matter how much we tried to get in his head that my mom was coming back soon, the look in his eyes just kept getting colder and more furious the longer he stood there. It didn't occur to me that his hand had been hidden behind his back the entire time until my mom showed up. We were all relieved, saying, "See, we told you, there she is." And like now, my mom is a scary woman. She does not take shit and she'll happily start throwing punches if she feels the situation calls for it. So immediately she was in Mama Bear mode and furiously telling off this old man after she saw how freaked out we all were. He was just now starting to move back to his house. He slunk away from her and glared at the 4 of us, batting his free hand at her, cursing and mumbling to himself. We watched him go, and as he turned around, my blood went cold. In the hand that he had been hiding was a large knife. It glinted off the street lamp, and we all hurried away to our car that my mom had found. My friends and I tried to laugh it off, but we were all scared and not willing to be alone for the rest of the night. It's seriously scary to think about what was running through that old man's head, especially since he was holding that damn knife the whole time. So, creepy old man with a knife behind his back, let's not meet. Why I'm done with the local fair. Every year since about the 5th grade, I've gone to our little town fair. It used to be in the mall parking lot, huge, well-kept, polite staff, and always busy for the week or so it was here. But the last 2 years, it's been rather small and kind of shady. The staff moved to a smaller, empty lot behind our local Outback. This year, my boyfriend took me as a little, "I'm sorry we're not going to prom" gesture. We're walking around for a little bit. It's still pretty early in the day, so it seems like mostly little kids and their parents are there. He and I decide we'll go to ride the bull, something I've done quite a few times growing up going to rodeos. This was his first time. I paid for him and begged him to do it with me. I explained what he had to do, how he can't hold on with 2 hands and whatnot, and he does well for his first time, about 15 seconds at full speed and shaking. Now it's my turn. I hop on and ride with no issues. I'm wearing skinny jeans, so I'm not entirely shocked when I get a wolf whistle about the little bit of lace that got flashed on one turn. Turning around thinking it was just my boyfriend, I walk off and walk back up to him, dizzy. A carny comes up and tells me I was one of the longest riders in this town. I quickly thank him and give him a big, proud smile, holding on to my boyfriend. He quickly pulls me away to the carousel and leans down to kiss me. I stand up on my tiptoes to reach him. The same carny, apparently working this ride, comes up to us and, in the most sarcastic tone possible, goes, "Aren't you cute?" Keep in mind, this guy is probably about 30 years old and smells like weed mixed with fair food. He looks at my boyfriend and goes, "But maybe she deserves someone a little better fit for her, or at least knows how to ride a bull." I pull my boyfriend out of line, pissed off and grossed out. He tells me we'll go when the guy's not there. We walk around some more, get some treats, and ride some other things. Probably about an hour later, we head back to the carousel. I'm carrying my big stuffed koala bear, and we get back in line. No sign of the creepy carny. We get our wristbands, stand, and get on. I sit on the outside while my boyfriend sits on the middle horse. The ride's going, and suddenly the creepy carny is back. He hops on quickly and holds on to the pole my horse is attached to. He just stares at me for a bit until I go, "Can I help you?" My boyfriend is watching, slightly amused. I'm not something to be messed with, and he knows as much. The carny looks at me, his gross yellow teeth stretched out in a grin, and goes, "Yeah, how about you show me more of that lace, and I'll get you a bigger bear than that sad thing." I'm completely disgusted and creeped out. I tell him to fuck off before I call the cops, and he's not getting the message until the ride stops. My boyfriend stands up, he towers over this guy and goes, "Hey, she said fuck off or I'll have the cops here in 2 minutes." The creepy carny buggers off and follows us around the rest of the night until I'm so freaked out we have to leave. So, creepy carnival worker, let's not meet again. Starting a new job is always a mix of excitement and nerves. When I landed a summer job at a local carnival in downtown LA, I was just looking for some extra cash before my senior year of college started in the fall. The carnival was a typical setup with rides, games, and food stands, but its main attraction was the fun house, which doubled as a haunted house after dark. It was actually a solid structure that I think used to be some old guy's mansion or something. I was assigned to manage the fun house, which was a favorite among the carnival goers. It seemed simple enough: guide the guests in, ensure they have a fun, safe time, and observe them leave. At first, everything seemed straightforward, but then I started noticing odd things. It started with small discrepancies. I'd count a dozen people entering, but only 11 would emerge. At first, I chalked it up to miscounting. After all, keeping track in the chaos of laughter and screams was no easy task. However, as the days passed, the numbers just didn't add up. 7 went in, 6 came out, 10 went in, 9 came out. Was I going crazy? Something was off, and I couldn't ignore it much longer. One particularly busy afternoon, a blonde girl caught my eye as she walked up to the fun house. She was drop-dead gorgeous and almost seemed out of place amidst the childlike atmosphere. She couldn't have been more than a few years older than me. I genuinely had to do a double take. I'm not a weird guy by any means, but I couldn't help but lock eyes with her for a few seconds. She smiled, handed me her ticket, and I directed her into the attraction. After she disappeared into the darkness, I went back to my duties. Time ticked by, and I watched attentively as people entered and exited, sometimes asking me questions and whatnot. Admittedly, I was paying a little more attention to the guests that night, as I wanted to see that girl as she left and maybe work up the courage to talk to her. Pretty soon, I started picking up on the fact that groups of people who had entered after her were beginning to emerge. A few more minutes passed, and I started getting worried. She should have been out by now. Compelled by genuine concern, I decided to abandon my post for a few minutes and go looking for her. I stepped inside and locked the entrance door. I began investigating, navigating the dimly lit rooms and narrow corridors. I moved through the house until I came across something I had noticed during my initial walkthrough, a barely noticeable seam in the wall. I'm not really sure what I was expecting, but curiosity got the best of me. I pressed against the seam, and I heard a distinct click. I played around with it some more, and my jaw nearly hit the floor when I realized it was a hidden door. It swung open slowly, revealing a pitch-black hallway. I stood there in shock. What in the world was this doing here? I was definitely going to have a long conversation with my boss about this. I walked into the hallway with my phone's flashlight guiding the way. I didn't have much brain power to spend being nervous because I was still so shocked about the whole situation. I got to the end of the passage and found another door. I flung it open, and to my surprise, it was a concealed exit that led back to the carnival grounds. I breathed a sigh of relief as this discovery proved I wasn't going crazy. All those people I had noticed leaving the attraction had probably stumbled across that secret door by accident and assumed it was the correct way to go. As I walked back the way I had come, I couldn't help but feel a little bummed out that I wasn't going to get the chance to talk to that girl. I'm not sure what came over me, but I decided to keep exploring the fun house instead of returning to my post. I think a part of me just wanted a few extra minutes of this impromptu break I was taking. I walked through a couple more rooms, and that's when I noticed it. On one of the walls was another faint seam identical to the first one I had seen. I again played with it until it clicked and swung open. I could immediately tell this one was very different. The putrid smell was the first thing I noticed. More concerning, though, was the fact that there was no corridor in this one, but a ladder. A ladder that led downwards. I was more confused than anything. This door was on the ground floor, and I was told specifically that this place didn't have a basement. I debated climbing down, but I just felt awful about the prospect that the girl might be down there. So, against my instincts, I began the descent. The smell only got worse as I climbed down into the darkness. I was expecting to find a basement, but what I found instead was far, far worse. I got to the bottom and pulled out my phone's flashlight. I was frozen in shock. I was literally standing in a tunnel that extended into the darkness. There was literally no way that this was part of the house above. The rational part of my brain screamed to turn back, to forget about it, but the mystery was too compelling. I ventured further, being careful not to make any noise. The walls were damp, and the tunnel was completely silent. As I explored, my flashlight beam fell on something unexpected. A white glittery purse was sitting in the middle of the corridor. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. It looked familiar, and then it hit me. It was that girl's purse. I was sure of it. I started to panic. Was she really down here? I doubted there was any way a rational person could find this tunnel and not turn around, but the proof was literally in my hands. My mind started racing. Was she hurt? Lost? And then a more terrifying thought hit me, was she alone? I didn't feel safe anymore, but I was in too deep. Violating every survival instinct I had, I yelled out into the tunnel for that girl. I waited. Nothing. I was just about to shout again when I heard the sound of rapid footsteps echoing through the tunnels. My first instinct was to run. I had every reason to believe whoever was running toward me was hostile. I turned around and bolted back to the ladder. I got halfway up and slipped, falling back to the bottom. The footsteps were basically right on top of me now. I knew I was done for. I braced myself for a fight, and then a voice rang out, a girl's voice. Her voice. She gasped, clutching her side as if in pain. I yelled at her to climb up, but she insisted that I follow her back into the darkness. For some reason, I told her there was no chance I was doing that and basically forced her up the ladder. We got to the top, and I slammed the door shut. I asked her how in the world she ended up down there, and she couldn't really give me a straight answer. She kept saying she didn't really remember how it happened, just that she suddenly realized she was underground. She said she started hearing things moving in the dark and that there were voices calling to her. I didn't know how to process this. I asked her if someone had guided her down there, and she said she didn't remember. The weirdest thing about her story was that she was looking at me with this blank stare that genuinely freaked me out. I basically interrogated her about why she told me to stay down there, but she didn't answer. I had had enough. I wanted to get as far away from this person as possible. I called the police, but she opted to leave the fun house before they got there. I never saw her again. The police investigated, and what they found was actually insane. Apparently, this house had been some sort of safe house during Prohibition in the 1920s. As such, it had a bunch of secret passageways that led to a section of the underground Prohibition tunnels that hadn't been discovered. The owner claimed he had no idea about the house's history, but I was skeptical. I quit my job and got as far away from there as possible. I still have so many questions. Did the owner know about this? Was that girl almost kidnapped? Had someone knocked her out and taken her down there or something? Was she part of the whole thing? I feel like there are a number of explanations for what happened to me, but all of them are equally terrifying. I hate carnivals. I think they're disgusting and filled with children. I hate the food, the games, and the smell of it all. My hatred of carnivals is probably biased, though, and mostly based on what I'm about to tell you. A few years ago, I was dragged to our local carnival by my younger sister. I obviously wasn't going to be rude and not go, but I wasn't looking forward to it. After a while, my sister got bored and wanted to leave, so I called my mom to pick us up. I actually opted not to go with them as I was in the midst of a fight with my dad and didn't want to go back home until he was asleep. I told my mom I'd walk home later, so she picked up my sister and left. The carnival was honestly a little pathetic. There were far fewer people there that night than I remember there being in previous years, and everyone looked miserable. I figured I might as well walk around a little to try and get my money's worth. After all, I had paid for a ticket out of my own pocket. I decided to step into the fun house as I figured that would at least be a little cool. I was expecting there to be a ton of people in there, but it was completely empty. There was literally not a single other person in there as far as I could tell. I had never been inside a fun house alone before. People don't realize how important the laughter and talking is to the atmosphere. Without it, you're basically just standing there in silence, surrounded by a bunch of weird mirrors. It was honestly a little creepy. I shrugged my shoulders and figured I might as well walk through it. Admittedly, I did get a pretty good laugh out of the distorted mirrors. I think I was like halfway through when I noticed something odd in one of the reflections. To my left, there was a head that seemed to be peering at me. I only saw it for a split second, but it was a bald guy with really sunken eyes. I whipped around but didn't see anyone. To be completely honest, I had no idea where he had even been standing. Since there were mirrors all over the place, he could have literally been anywhere. I thought it was especially creepy since I didn't hear the funhouse entrance open. He either snuck in behind me or he had already been inside. I kept walking, going a little more quickly now, and then I saw him again out of the corner of my eye. He had this deranged smile. This time it was the exact same face, I was positive. I tried to figure out where he was standing, but the reflections were too confusing. I yelled for him to get lost but got no response. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. I picked up the pace again, but it was difficult trying to navigate this maze of mirrors, and I kept hitting dead ends. I started sweating, constantly looking over my shoulder every few seconds. A few minutes later, I turned a corner after hitting another dead end, and a hand reached out from behind one of the mirrors, grabbing my wrist. I screamed, cursing at the guy to let go of me, but he held firm. I punched his arm, forcing him to let go. I fell to the ground in the fray and saw the creepster in his full form. He was wearing all gray, had a bit of a gut, and a tired, sunken face. I jumped to my feet before he could reach for me again and sprinted back the way I came. I don't know if it was survival instincts or not, but finding my way back to the entrance was somehow easier with the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I sprinted out of the fun house and caught my breath. I reached into my back pocket, and a horrifying realization hit me. I didn't have my wallet. I must have dropped it when I fell. There was no way I was going back in there. After running to the nearest staff person, I told them everything that happened. She seemed confused and told me that the fun house was closed to patrons that night. I was horrified. They called the police and searched it but found nothing, not even my wallet. I felt like such an idiot. I told them that that guy was probably an ex-employee with a key, but they shrugged off my theory and told me to go home. So reluctantly, that's what I did. It's not like I had gotten hurt or anything. I wish I could tell you the story ended there, but I can't. A week later, my girlfriend called me one night in a panic, frantically screaming into the phone about something terrible that happened. Apparently, someone had been texting her phone pretending to be me and convinced her to drive out to this remote location to help me change a tire. Thankfully, she decided to bring her dad even though the guy told her to come alone. They pretty quickly realized what was going on when the car parked in the lot wasn't mine. Her dad stepped out of the car, and 6 dudes stepped out of the car in front of them. He sprinted back to the car and hightailed it out of there before those guys could catch up to him. The whole thing made sense. I did have my girlfriend's number written down on a slip of paper in my wallet, which explains how he got her number. Both of us changed all our contact information, and it's been a month without incident. I really don't know how to feel about this whole ordeal. I think I'm just going to try to block the memory out of my head. One of my favorite hobbies has always been playing video games. When I was younger, I used to do a lot of console gaming, but in recent years, I've done most of my gaming on the PC. So, I have a setup in my bedroom in the apartment that I currently live in. It's in one corner of the room opposite my bed. Several weeks ago, I was having a gaming night with a friend. We both logged on at probably a little after 8 p.m. I was at my apartment, and he was at his apartment, so we were just gaming online. We were going to go until we got tired. I live alone in my small one-bedroom apartment, which is kind of old and on the first floor of the building. After playing online for several hours, neither of us were tired yet. At this point, I'm guessing it was around 11 p.m. That's when I thought I heard a knocking at my window behind me. I had my headset on, which is mostly noise canceling, so I couldn't hear that well, but I looked back to the window. It's probably like 15 feet from my desk and the chair I was sitting in. When I looked, I thought I saw what appeared to be a man moving away from the window. The window looks out to a small grassy area behind the apartments. Then there's a fence between the next property and a little woods before another apartment complex. In all my time living here, I had never really seen anybody out walking back there or anything, so this was kind of strange and also suspicious. The total time that I saw the guy was less than a second, though he was already moving away when I turned around and looked. I told my friend I would be back in a minute, and then I got up. I then walked over to the window and looked out of it. It was pretty dark in the little space back there, but I could see a little bit. However, I did not notice anyone there. I then left my bedroom and walked out to the kitchen, which also had a window looking out to that same general area. This had a broader view, but I still didn't see anyone. I figured that the guy was gone. This situation was kind of weird, especially with it being late at night. My only good explanation that I could think of was that possibly the man accidentally went to the wrong apartment window. He could have been trying to get somebody else's attention who he knew. I then went back to my gaming chair and sat down. I told my friend about what had happened. We chatted about it for a while and decided that it probably wasn't a big deal. However, probably 30 minutes after this or so, I remember looking back to the window. My headset was still on, so I don't remember if I heard anything or if I was just randomly turning around. When I did, though, I saw a man standing at the window. He was looking in. Because of it being dark outside, I did not really see any details of the man's face or what he looked like. Instinctively, I quickly got up from my chair. When I did, the man moved out of sight from the window. I then walked out of my bedroom into my small hallway with just a bathroom and a closet. Then to the right is the living room. It just felt safer to be away from that window. Moments later, before I returned to my bedroom or really did anything, I heard a noise. I was standing in the hallway, and there were a few sort of loud banging noises from my bedroom window. It seemed like possibly the man was going to try to break in. I heard several more loud bangs on the window, and I worried that it would break. I walked over to my door and left my apartment, going into the hallway. Then I called the police. I told them about what happened and said that I thought a man was breaking in. While I waited for the police, I went to the lobby of the apartment building near the front. I felt much better being away from my unit. The police got there minutes later. They searched my apartment and behind it. When I returned to my place, I saw that my window was actually broken and the man had gotten in. Several things were messed up. I was also missing several items. However, the man was able to escape before the police got there. At the end of the day, I was just glad that I left before he broke in. With the window being broken, I went and stayed at a friend's house for the night. The window got repaired the next day. Though I'm mad about having several of my things stolen, it was not even $100 worth of stuff. I am, however, sort of concerned that something like this will happen again. I still live in the same apartment, but luckily, nothing like this has happened since. This happened way back in 2006. I was 17 and living in Uvalde, Texas, a very low-income neighborhood, the kind you'll find sprawled out all over the place in rural Texas when you're not right outside of a city. The closest city to me was San Antonio. I was going to some local community college because that's all my parents could afford for me. One of my best friends from high school, Bodie, moved to San Antonio to go to San Antonio College. He was living in some small apartment a little outside of the city with a roommate. His girlfriend would also often stay with him. Since the city is only really an hour and a half away, I would visit him all the time. He invited me this one weekend to come crash for the night, so I took my trusty old 1995 Toyota pickup truck. Just kidding, the thing was a piece of crap. The gas gauge didn't even work on it. I'd have to always just keep track of when the last time I filled the tank up was, then reset the trip mileage. I took Route 90, which was a straight shot from Uvalde to San Antonio. I was on the road at like 2:40 p.m. on a Friday, and there was no traffic at all. I got to Bodie at a reasonable time. His girlfriend wouldn't be getting there until tomorrow, so tonight we were going to go out. We stopped at a liquor store and drank in his apartment for a while with his roommate. Then the three of us went to this dive bar that would kind of look the other way with fake IDs. That was basically our night. We got back to their apartment around 2 a.m. after getting food. I slept on the couch. The next day would have almost been the same thing, but Bodhi and his girlfriend were having issues all day. As the two of them got drunker as the night progressed, she started yelling at him in front of me, and it got really awkward and uncomfortable. I didn't really have much to drink that day because I was already iffy about staying the night with her there. I eventually decided I would just head back home. I said goodbye to everyone and started my journey home. It was very late at night. I want to guess midnight, maybe a little earlier. Route 90 was deserted at this time, so I would fly for my pickup standards. But suddenly, the engine started sputtering. I felt my heart completely drop as I realized I forgot to fill up the tank. I slowed down, but it was too late. The engine cut. I pulled to the side of the road and tried starting it a few times, but it did no good. I took out my cell phone, which was equally as shitty as my truck, and tried to get a signal. No shot. I couldn't even call for help. I had to just put my hazards on and hope a good Samaritan would pass. You wouldn't believe how long I sat on the side of the road before seeing headlights. I waved my arms as the car approached, but it zoomed past me, ignoring me. This happened again after another 10 minutes or so. I was starting to feel hopeless, like maybe I should just sleep in my car and wait till sunrise to get help. So that's what I was going to do. I got inside my car, took the key out of the ignition to cut the battery, and just angled my seat back to go to sleep. I would hear the occasional car zooming past, like once every 10 minutes, but it didn't feel worth waving people down in the dark. It seemed sketchy for myself and to the people in the cars. But when I was starting to actually drift away to sleep, a car door closing from behind me woke me up. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw a car pulled up behind me with its headlights off. I turned around now to get a better look. There was some big pickup truck, but I couldn't see anyone inside of it, nor did I see anyone outside of it. Maybe someone pulled over to help. I got out of the car and said, "Excuse me," to no response. I walked closer to the truck just to confirm no one was inside. Then I walked back to my car. This was weird. I looked towards the trees on the side of the road. Maybe someone was pissing in the woods. I went back inside my car and locked the door. This was just too weird. Suddenly, there was a tap at my window. I jumped. I looked to see a man looking down at me into the car, smiling. I didn't do anything yet. He said, "Hey, buddy, need a hand?" I lowered the window a crack and said, "Hey, I ran out of gas." The man said, "That's quite the predicament. Step out and give me a hand with this real quick." When he said this, I thought he meant help him with a gas jug to fill up my tank or something, honestly. So I stepped out of the truck and shut the door, expecting him to lead me to his truck. But he stood there, looked down at me because he was much taller, still smiling, and said, "I need you to empty your pockets, please." It took me a second to process what he meant. I was literally a broke college student driving a piece of pickup truck. I wasn't about to get robbed of the only cash I had in my phone. I ran for it in the direction of the trees. I'm small but fast. I turned around and saw he was chasing after me. Once I made it into the trees, I zigzagged all over the place until I seemed to lose him. Then I crouched behind a big tree to catch my breath. When I heard him approaching closer, I quieted my breath. I heard him say out loud, "I'll kill you, you piece of." I don't know if he was just saying it out loud out of anger or if he wanted me to hear it, but I was too scared to move. Even after I heard his footsteps move away, I didn't move. In fact, I stayed in this position the rest of the night, eventually laying behind this big tree up until dawn. I went back over to the highway to my truck, and the truck behind me was gone, but my truck's doors were both open. I found that my glove box had been gone through and completely emptied of anything somewhat valuable. My flannel hoodie was also taken, which had something in the pocket, I'm sure. I finally managed to wave down a good Samaritan, and he gave me a ride to the closest gas station. I bought a fuel can, filled it with gas, and the man brought me back to my car, where I filled my tank just enough to drive the truck to a gas station to fill up completely. Then I went straight home. This was a real-life learning experience for me, that there are bad people out there who will try to take advantage of you when you're in a vulnerable spot. But there are also good people, like the man who helped me. This experience happened to me when I was only 9 years old. Being that it was so long ago, I don't remember every small detail, but I'll do my best to keep everything as accurate as possible. Back then, I lived in a considerably remote area and the U.S. neighboring houses were a good half-mile apart. Therefore, while my family had met a couple of our neighbors, many of them were complete strangers. This included the resident of the house to the left of ours. I don't remember his name, but it was an elderly man that lived there. He was creepy, to say the least. All of the windows on his house were spray-painted so that no one could see inside, and his whole yard was completely overgrown. I know all this because every Monday through Friday, I had to walk past his house to get home from school. Every time I did this, the man would either be standing on his porch watching me or trying to make conversation with me as I walked by. It got to the point where I dreaded walking home from school just because I'd have to walk past him. But this wasn't even the worst of it. Maybe once or twice a month, the guy would make the half-mile walk to our house in the middle of the night. He would then shine a flashlight into the window of my room. I knew it was the same guy too because one of the times, I witnessed him walking down the road towards our house. Looking back, this was 100% extremely alarming behavior, but at the time, I thought the best way of handling it was just to ignore it. Therefore, I didn't tell my parents about it. I also remember reasoning that my bedroom was on the second floor, so it's not like he was able to see much of inside my room anyway. Skip to a summer night in that same year, and I was once again woken up by the light of a flashlight shining in my room. This time, it was followed by a subtle thud sound against the wall. It felt like my heart had stopped. The only thing running through my mind in that moment was how it sounded exactly like a ladder being propped up against the side of the house. Not long later, my suspicions would be confirmed. A knocking sound rang out from the glass of the window. I looked over and was met with the smiling face of the man gesturing me to open the window. But no. I screamed and ran to my parents' bedroom. I desperately explained to them how the neighbor was outside my window. They went in my room, but of course, he was gone by that point. The worst part is they didn't even believe me, chalking it up to me seeing things. Therefore, the police were never called. But even now, as an adult, I know exactly what I saw. I try not to think about the intentions he had towards my 9-year-old self. I never saw him again after that. In fact, not even a week after the occurrence, his house had a for sale sign up next to it, which to me serves as further proof that it was him. I've lived in many different places since then, and not one neighbor comes even slightly close to how creepy that man was. My boyfriend and I used to live in a small house that we were renting at the time. We were young and it was our first place, so we needed something affordable. We found a place for just $700. It was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, 900 square foot house. It was in a really rough part of town, but we thought if we minded our business, kept our noses down, and stayed alert, that we'd be fine. It was nothing fancy at all, but it was still more than what we needed. We both had jobs, only being paid $10 to $15 an hour, and we were both also full-time college students. So we were out of the house more than we were home, especially my boyfriend. He worked as a garbage man and got lots of overtime. He would get to work around 7 a.m. and sometimes wouldn't be home until 7:30 or 8 o'clock. Whereas I, on the other hand, worked at a salon for a new and upcoming small local business. I was paid under the table there, so it helped with taxes and the lack of hours I was working. My boyfriend, whose name is Arnold, by the way, took night classes for college. He was studying law but later changed to business after just a year. That's not really the point, but the point I'm trying to make is that he was hardly ever home, mostly to eat and sleep. Even on the weekends, he worked a part-time job for extra money. I would always have dinner ready for him every night so he could eat before class and so we could spend what little time we had together every night before he would have to leave at 9 o'clock for 4 hours. I would usually be sleeping by the time he got home. When Arnold returned home, I was nowhere to be found. Of course, he freaked out and filed a missing persons report after blowing up my phone and me not replying for over 30 minutes. It wasn't until 2 days later that Arnold ran into our neighbor while getting the mail, and for some reason, he thought that there was a possibility that he might know something. Arnold admitted that he didn't really think he did, but he was trying everything he could at first by asking anyone any kind of questions he could think of. He asked him when he saw me last and stuff like that. This is where things get much crazier. My boyfriend thought he was acting really weird, and way weirder than usual, so he called the cops on him. But since they didn't have any proof or probable cause, and they didn't have a warrant nor consent to search the house, it didn't go very far. Arnold had this very serious feeling inside that something was wrong with this guy and that he had something to do with me going missing. He literally snuck into our neighbor's house later that night after he saw him leave. The house was disgusting and was honestly as bad as some of the worst Hoarders episodes I've ever seen. He looked all around the house and was yelling for me in case I was in there. He had no clue if I really was, but I finally heard him yelling for me and I screamed as best as I could from downstairs with the duct tape covering my mouth. He didn't hear me yelling until he started to search downstairs for me. Yes, the man kidnapped me and did unspeakable things to me for days. Arnold got me out of there and we called the police. Of course, we lied a bit so Arnold didn't get charged with breaking and entering. We told police that Arnold heard me screaming down there and that he rushed in here to save me and that we called the police right away. We never had any issue with Arnold getting any charges, thankfully. I don't really like to talk about how he kidnapped me and how it all went down. It makes me too uncomfortable. I'll explain it briefly, though. While Arnold was gone that night and I was sleeping, the man broke in and managed to knock me out cold by beating me half to death and dragged me next door in the middle of the night without anyone noticing. This story is very real, and what happened to me is still something I live with and sticks with me to this very day. He used to stare at me like a creeper every day, and we always thought he was strange, but never did we think it would come to this. I'm pretty sure this is literally every woman's worst nightmare. When I was in middle school, I was desperate for friends. I tried to talk to anyone that would let me sit with them, but nobody ever seemed to like me enough to keep me around, or they would just be mean to me. That's why, when the two prettiest, most popular girls in school, Azure and Alita, invited me to a sleepover with them, I was thrilled. I had tried sitting with them at lunch a few times before, but they always told me to go away because they were busy talking about something that wasn't my business. Then, on the last day of school one year, they both came up to me while I was sitting by myself. They said they really wanted to hang out with me over the summer but didn't want other people to see us hanging out together while we were still in school. Even as a naive and lonely middle schooler, I knew that was a severely underhanded invite, but I accepted it with enthusiasm anyway. I would take what I could get, and they knew it. Of course, my mom was just glad I was finally starting to hang out with other kids, and she gladly gave me permission to go, especially when I said that Azure's mom offered to serve all three of us dinner. When I got there, it was about 8 p.m., and I was already dressed in my pajamas. Alita and Azure were still fully dressed. When I asked if we were still going to have dinner together, Azure said that they had just finished eating right before I got there. Then Alita said I didn't need to eat so much anyway. They were already putting me down, but I wanted to be friends with them so badly that I let them do it. After I said hi to Azure's mom, who was already wine drunk and ready for us to not be her problem anymore, we all went up to Azure's room upstairs. It was a Jack and Jill style bedroom with her own bathroom and another bedroom on the other side. I asked Azure who was in the other room, but she snapped at me and said it was her older sister and told me not to be so nosy. I apologized profusely, but they just told me to be quiet because my voice was annoying. Azure had a bunch of awesome stuff in her room, from Taylor Swift posters to expensive makeup and giant stuffed animals, things that my mom couldn't afford to get me. But as much as I wanted to ask her about it, I knew she wouldn't like that, so I just looked at the floor. We started to play Truth or Dare, which Alita and Azure used to mine all sorts of information about me, including who I had a crush on and how much money my parents made. I told them everything honestly, only for them to laugh in my face every time. Whenever I asked them to tell the truth about something, they made up a bunch of ridiculous stuff that I knew was a lie, but of course, I wasn't going to call them out on it. When I finally got sick and tired of having to spill all my beans, I told them to dare me to do something. As soon as I said that, Alita and Azure looked at each other with the most wicked smiles, like they had been waiting for me to say that the whole time. Then Azure dared me to go into the bathroom and play the Bloody Mary game. I didn't know what it was at the time, and when I admitted this, they both screamed in disbelief that I didn't know who Bloody Mary was. They explained it to me and said I had to do it or I would have to leave the sleepover. I wanted to stay, so I stepped inside the bathroom. Azure and Alita lit a candle in front of the mirror, then they turned off the lights and shut the door. You have to say it loud and clear, Azure teased me from the other side. If you don't, we'll know. I was shaking. I had no idea what would happen. Was this Bloody Mary someone that could really be summoned? Would she really kill me if she came? I didn't know, but the only thing that pushed me forward was the need to be accepted and the belief that things like ghosts didn't exist. I looked at myself in the mirror, took a deep breath, and said, "Bloody Mary," 3 times slowly. For a moment, nothing happened. I looked behind my reflection, and there was nothing, until I saw a woman crawling out of the bathtub behind me. I screamed and turned around, and I realized it was real. There was a real bloody woman sitting in the shower. Her skin was gray, like she was dead, and her clothes were torn up. But her eyes were open, and she was looking right at me. Slowly, the woman stepped out of the tub and started walking toward me. I was so petrified I couldn't move. I wanted to, but it was like my legs had turned to stone. With every step she took, she left a trail of blood. Soon, She was right in front of me. I screamed again, but she grabbed me by the throat and lifted me up to my tiptoes. She opened her mouth and revealed a gaping jaw full of blood and blackness, inching toward my neck like she was going to take a bite out of it. I couldn't maintain control of myself, so in that moment, I peed my pants. But then, at the last second, the doors swung open and the lights turned on. "What's going on in here?" Azure asked. "Why are you screaming?" I could barely get a word out through my stuttering teeth, but I managed what I could. "Bloody Mary was here," I said. "She was right in front of me. I saw her, and it was real. She grabbed me and everything, and she tried to kill me." Alita and Azure said, almost in unison, "What?" They looked all around the bathroom, but of course, she was gone. "Stop acting crazy," said Alita. "You're just begging for attention." "Honestly, it's kind of embarrassing," Azure snickered and agreed. "Wait, did you pee yourself?" "That's disgusting," Alita exclaimed. "Oh my god, so yeah, actually, I think if you're going to act like that, you just have to leave." "What? Why?" I asked in disbelief. But before I knew it, Azure and Alita dragged me out of the bathroom and pushed me down the stairs, then threw all my stuff at me. I crawled to Azure's mother, a sobbing mess, and begged her to call my mom. Based on the look in her eyes and the way she sighed, I think she was very close to just letting me cry myself to sleep on the ground. But thankfully, she had the basic decency to call my mother so I could get out of that awful house. I never fully explained to my mother what happened, except for the fact that they were so mean that I cried. I hid the bruises from being pushed down the steps, and I wore turtlenecks for the next few weeks to hide the bruises on my neck. That was how my summer vacation began that year. Needless to say, I never left the house again until school was back in session. As for Bloody Mary, Azure and Alita's gaslighting was so effective on me that I honestly believed she existed for over 2 years after that. Until one day, I told this story to my first real friend in high school, and they explained to me the obvious truth that it was just Azure's older sister in a convincing costume. My friends and I were very stupid when we were teenagers. I was like 16 or 17 when this happened. It was the month of October, and I wanted to do something scary in the spirit of Halloween. There's a small cemetery about 15 minutes from where I live, and when I was drunk with a couple of friends, I said we should sneak into it. I'll make up some names for my friends, Dion and Ezra. We were at Dion's house. He didn't drink ever, so when I came up with the idea, he was the one to drive us to the cemetery. Ezra and I were really the ones leading this, Dion was just along for the ride. But then again, he hadn't been drinking. Dion parked in some parking lot across the street. It was a ghost town because it was past midnight at that point. We made sure no one was around to see us as we hopped the fence into the cemetery. It wasn't exactly pitch black out, but it was slightly hard to see more than 10 feet in front of us, so we were all using our iPhone flashlights. There didn't appear to be any night security in the cemetery, so we kind of dispersed from each other. Dion seemed to be following Ezra more closely. I could still see where they were because of their flashlights. I went off a little further on my own and decided I'd start taking a creepy video. So I started recording with the lights still on, of course. I recorded a bunch of old headstones and the general eerie vibe of the cemetery at night. I didn't see Ezra and Dion anymore, so I started to go look for them, still recording. I looked at my phone screen and froze. There was a woman dressed in a white gown or a dress, I want to say, with long gray-looking hair. She was looking down at the ground. I looked up from my phone screen to look at her in person, but she was gone. I started to back away. I looked back at my phone screen, and there she was again, only now she was looking into the camera, or rather looking at me. I looked up from the phone again and could not see her once more, so I looked back down at the screen again, and there I could see her moving closer to me. I started to scream for Ezra and Dion as I sprinted away from that spot. I couldn't see their lights anywhere. They weren't answering my screams. I had a feeling they were going to try to scare me, so I ran back for the fence of the cemetery to hop it and get out. I made it to Dion's car and texted the two of them, saying they need to get out of the cemetery now. They met me at the car minutes later. We all sat in a car, and I showed them the video I took. They had the same horrified looks on their faces I did. Now that I was actually watching the whole video, I could see the moment the woman slowly lifted her head from looking at the ground to looking at me, and then she starts to move towards me. We could only see her moving for like a second or two before I start screaming in the video and running away. But the way she was moving, we could see no leg movement. It almost seemed as though she were floating to me. I had that video saved on my old iPhone 5S, but the stupid thing won't turn on. It gets stuck at the Apple logo. I don't want to reset that phone until I can get that video off of it somehow. My friends firmly believe the woman in the video was a real living person who also happened to be in the cemetery that night, but me, having been the one to actually find her and only being able to see her on my phone screen, well, let's just say I was never a believer in the paranormal until that night foreign. I served in the U.S. military, in the Marines, for 7 years, and I've been deployed overseas for 2 tours, each lasting 3 to 4 months, during 2003 and 2004 in Afghanistan. During my second tour in 2004, I remember it was August during a hot summer night in the desert. We were heading back to camp and driving in 2 separate jeeps. One of the privates, Mika was his name, leaned over from the back seat and said to me, "Hey sir, can you let off the AC a little bit?" I replied to him, "Private Mika, the AC is on setting 2 out of 5. We're almost to camp, so just hang in there." Another private, by the name of Noah, who was sitting in the passenger seat, said, "Sir, I'm freezing. It feels like we're in Alaska." I replied, "Privates, I don't feel this cold you're talking about." To make my squad happy, I went ahead and turned off the AC in the Jeep, even though I knew it was going to be a hot 4 miles ahead until we got back to base. I looked over to Private Noah and asked, "You feel better?" But I was cut off from completing my sentence when Orion said over the walkie-talkie, "Sarge, confirmed visual of an enemy sniper in the church tower window." I immediately replied, "How sure are you? This place was secured 4 months ago." I grabbed a pair of binoculars and looked into the church tower, and suddenly my stomach began to turn when I saw that the lookout was not lying. I quickly ordered both jeeps to turn behind the building so that the sniper could not see the squad inside his scope. I yelled to Orion from my walkie, "I need you to take a shot, keep it silenced. If there's one in the tower, who knows how many else there are." Several moments passed before Orion took the shot and replied in the walkie, "Sarge, we have a direct hit, the sniper is down." I was relieved because this sort of situation, if left unmanaged, could be deadly for us or a future squad in the region. But then a few moments later, Orion was back on the walkie, "Scratch that, sir. He's back in the window and sir, he looks like he's laughing." I grabbed my walkie and angrily replied, "So keep shooting, take him down, roger that, sir," and a few more minutes went by when Officer Orion responded, "8 rounds fired, sir. Sniper appears to be down." We proceeded to drive our jeeps down the outskirts of the city, heading cautiously towards the church tower where the sniper had been spotted. We first cleared the buildings around the tower to make sure he wasn't alone, but apparently, he was. We found nothing but broken glass and furniture that was destroyed, and chunks of walls that were on the floor of the buildings. We finally walked toward the church tower. I slowly led the crew up inside the building. The basement level was the chapel, which was empty, nothing but destroyed pews and a knocked-over podium by the stage. I had 3/4 of the guys stay on the bottom level, and the rest went up with me to confirm Orion's kill. But as we ascended the stairwell, it felt insanely cold, and it only grew colder the further up we got. Did this church have functioning air conditioning? How in the world was it this cold in here? I was wondering as I began to reach the top. A sudden stench hit my nose and made my stomach sink, the smell of rot and decay. I poked my head around the corner slowly, weapon drawn and pointed out. I wanted to turn around so bad, but I knew that I had to complete my task. That room was clear, but I needed to head upwards. The body had to be found. When I reached the attic, I didn't find a body, but I did find broken glass from the window where the shots had come through. I spoke in the walkie-talkie and said that it could not be confirmed, thinking that the guy had escaped or he had been in a group and they had already left the proximity. Orion soon spoke up through the walkie and said, "You've got to be kidding me, sir." I saw him go down on the third shot. I was startled to see something written on the wall. In Arabic, the text was dark red, and to be honest with you, at first, I thought it was blood. I had to remind myself that this wasn't some horror film. I'd seen that lettering before, and I was more than sure what it said, home. My nerves were trembling at this point. I couldn't take it anymore and ran downstairs. After reporting this to my commanding officer, he hated the sound of it. He said that he didn't want us to come back until the soldier was captured or executed. I said, "Sir, yes sir," and we stayed all night looking for him. I did not mention what I saw upstairs to anyone in my squad because I didn't want to scare them. I was already a bit spooked, but even after another squad joined us as backup, we never found a trace of the sniper we'd seen. Long after the failure to locate this sniper, we never had to go back to that church or town, for that matter, and I was extremely thankful for that. But that doesn't mean it didn't stay in my head for a long time. We saw someone in that attic. We shot him around 8 times. We felt that chilling cold. It was impossible for it to be that cold out there. And the red word on the wall that said home, was it this ghost sniper's plea of what he wanted, or was it a warning for us to get away? I'll never know for sure. It was a Memorial Day weekend, so my friend group rented a lakefront house for the weekend 3 hours away from home. It was cheap because it was in the middle of nowhere in North Carolina. It was Callista, Cara, Zelda, Mia, Cheryl, and myself. We all piled into Cheryl's truck. I was the one to find this place on Airbnb, and what was most appealing about it was the big deck with the hot tub on it that overlooked the lake. There was also a fire pit right by the water with a bunch of Adirondack chairs around it. Everything about it seemed perfect for a few days and nights of getting wasted with some friends. The Airbnb host told me that when we got to the property, there was a hidden key behind the mailbox to unlock the front driveway gate. The driveway was made of gravel and dirt, and it cut through a small opening in the woods, bringing a slight uphill to a bigger opening where the house was. Cheryl parked the truck right next to the front deck. The deck wrapped around the entire house, which was pretty cool. The first thing I did was walk to the back part of the deck and look at the view of the lake. It was very beautiful and peaceful. too bad we were about to be blasting music and partying. Right as we were done unpacking, everyone cracked open beers, and we wasted no time letting the weekend begin. We played beer pong, cornhole, barbecued, and blasted music for hours. We were really loud because, as far as we knew, this was the only house around here. It's not like there were any nearby neighbors to complain. The phone connection out there was very spotty, so we really were just living in the moment, socializing with each other, not distracted by social media and whatnot. As it was getting darker and we were sitting by the fire pit, we all got startled when a voice came from the edge of the woods. It was some middle-aged woman with short hair. She started yelling at us to lower the music, so someone lowered the volume of the music. The woman started more or less lecturing us, saying how we out-of-towners always come here, litter in the lake, and create nothing but noise. She seemed like genuine white trash. I apologized on behalf of all of us, and one of the girls asked the woman if she lived nearby and if she could hear the music. The woman responded, still in a yell, that she couldn't even hear herself think. She didn't acknowledge the other question regarding if she lived nearby. Then, she just walked away into the woods, like literally into the dark woods. It was so strange. When we were sure she was out of earshot, we all erupted into laughter. As bizarre as the encounter was, we had to make light of it, but it also did put a slight damper on things considering we thought for sure we were far enough away from any neighboring houses to blast music and be loud. But we continued to drink, and pretty soon that concern was forgotten about, and we got loud again. Some immeasurable amount of time passed before a song ended, and it went quiet for a second, and we heard a voice calling out from the lake. We paused the music and listened, and sure enough, a voice was calling out for help in the middle of the lake. We all looked at each other nervously. I stood up and went to the water and yelled out, "Who's out there? Are you in the water?" The voice called back, "Yes, help." Adrenaline started to kick in. There was a kayak leaned up against the deck by the water with 2 sets of paddles. Cheryl and I agreed to paddle out there in an effort to save whoever was out there. We yelled out at them to keep calling out, but as we got in the water, the calls seemed to get further away no matter how deep we got into the lake. After like 5 to 10 minutes of rowing out to the complete darkness of this lake, calling out repeatedly for that man, we heard it was just utter silence. All we could see were the lights from the house sitting at the edge of the lake, and then just darkness in every other direction. It was only the sound of the light splashes of water and then screams, female screams, coming from the direction of the house. They sounded gut-wrenching, like genuine screams of danger. It sounded like more than one, at least 2 of the girls' screams. We immediately started paddling back, even more panicked now. The screams stopped long before we got back to the shore. We screamed out for our friends, but we checked inside and outside of the cabin, and all 4 of them were gone, vanished without a trace. We tried texting and calling them, but we had no bars, of course. Cheryl's truck was still there, so we took it and drove up the road looking for the nearest neighboring house. We found it, a similar opening in the woods that led up a hill and onto a property where we saw a house with the lights on. We went to ring the doorbell multiple times, but no one ever answered. We went to look through one of the windows in the front, and what we saw sent chills up my spine. We could see clear as day into the living room. There was a lamp on in the corner, and in the middle of the room, somewhat close to the window, was that trashy woman we saw who came and yelled at us before. She was standing still, doing nothing, just facing the window looking out at us. She had a borderline angry-looking expression. We yelled, asking for help, but when she wouldn't move, we were too creeped out to stay there and left. As we got back in the truck, about to drive to another house, my phone started vibrating. It was Mia calling me. Thank God. I picked up and asked her they were and what happened, but I could barely get a word in as Mia said there were two men with axes in their hands wearing masks over their heads walking towards them out of the woods, and that's why the girls screamed and they all ran away down the road. One of them was currently on the phone with 911 and they were waiting. It was out in the woods right on the side of the road. It wasn't long after that the call disconnected and I wasn't able to reach him again. So we waited on the side of the road, not far from the house. When we finally saw flashing lights coming down the road, we waved them down and asked them to help us find our friends first. We drove up the road until we saw our friends come out from the woods, waving their hands. We scooped them up and followed the police back to the house. Once there, we collected all of our belongings as Mia and the girls frantically recounted what they had just gone through. Oddly enough, the Airbnb was not broken into, and none of our stuff was taken. There was no sign of any men with axes. We also told the police about the cries for help in the lake, which I believe prompted a search team to come to the scene. By then, we were already long gone from that place. We never looked back. After much persistence and battling with Airbnb and the host, we got our money back for the stay, well, most of it. None of us could ever figure out this situation, like if it was all a trap. If the calls for help from the lake were linked with the men approaching the house with the axes, and if that woman was also affiliated somehow with this. Was it just to scare us out of there, or were they really going to attack us? I don't know, and I don't care. I just don't do remote places anymore after this, and I know the girls won't either. It was Memorial Day weekend of 2021. The world was recovering from COVID, and everyone was looking to celebrate. That included my friends and me. Our friend George has a really nice big boat. Well, his dad has a big nice boat, but George gets to use it. The lucky bastard was born into a lot of money. We do reap some benefits from being friends with him, though. Out in the bay was a big boat meetup planned for Memorial Day, so our core group, Grant, Hale, and I, all met up at George's house on the water, and we took the boat out from there to meet up with George's other boat friends. There were a bunch of boats tied together in a shallow part of the bay, and everyone was hopping from boat to boat and walking around in the water with drinks in hand. I was getting really drunk along with everyone else, and unfortunately, that included George. No one really realized until it was too late that he had way too much to drink and was not okay to drive the boat back home. I told him to sleep it off in the cabin, so he went down to sleep. It started to get dark after so many hours of drinking and mingling with other boat people, and one by one, the other boats left. We were the last boat left, just the four of us. I went to check on George, and he was still knocked out. We had to stall for hours with each other until he finally woke up. He did seem more sober now, so he started to slowly drive the boat back in the direction of his canal. On the way, we noticed the lights of another boat seemingly following us. George started freaking out, thinking it was the Bay Police. He didn't want to do anything suspicious like speeding up or slowing down, anything that might draw attention, so we kept our speed steady. We made it to the canal, and he lives about 5 minutes up the canal. The boat behind us was still following us up the canal. George was really starting to freak out, worried he'd get a DUI and lose his license, and of course, his dad killing him. The canal is a no-wake zone, so we had to slow it down even more. As we went down the canal, the boat behind us was catching up to us. At this point, we were fully expecting the boat to be a police boat. We started discussing a story to stick to, that we took the boat out and just hung out on the bay. We started hiding all the beer cans, ready to lie completely about having had any beer. We got to George's dock, and he looped the boat around to align it next to it. He did it pretty smoothly for someone who was intoxicated. The boat that was tailing us the entire time approached, and as it began to pass us, we realized it wasn't a police boat at all. It was just a random boat. George said out loud, "Who the hell is this? He knows everyone on his canal," and he said he'd never seen that boat. As it directly passed us, we saw 3 men standing on the back of the boat looking at us. It was honestly in a very aggressive way. George taunted them and said, "What?" None of them responded. Their boat passed us, and they continued to watch us. While we were all relieved it wasn't the police, George was now nervous as to why they followed us all the way down the canal when they don't even live on this canal. I said perhaps it's someone visiting a friend's house for Memorial Day, and he reluctantly agreed and said, "Could be." He tied up the boat to the dock, and we helped the best we could. He said he'd clean it tomorrow. We all went inside his house. His parents weren't home this weekend, he had the place to himself. So we suggested throwing a last-minute pool party, but it was already like 10 o'clock, and there wasn't really any chance of throwing anything big that last minute. So the 4 of us went back outside to just hang by the pool, continuing to drink, with all of us planning on crashing at George's place for the night. That boat passed by the house again within maybe 10 minutes, and that's when we really got suspicious. The men on the boat again stared at us, and this time George said nothing. The night became a daze. At some point after this, my memory gets really foggy, as I guess I blacked out. The next thing I remember is waking up with extreme cotton mouth in the middle of the night. At first, I thought the unbearable thirst I was feeling was what caused me to suddenly wake up, but I was very wrong. I looked around the room and saw Grant and Hale on the couch as well, sleeping. I went to the kitchen to drink some water from the faucet like a water fountain, that's how thirsty I was. But in the kitchen, I was met with someone else, dressed in a cliché all-black robbery outfit, including a black ski mask, and he was clear as day holding a gun. I didn't scream. He aimed the gun at me and told me not to make a sound. It was an unexplainable feeling, knowing that my existence could have ended at any given moment. And everything would turn black, washed over my body. He said to me in a quiet voice, "Where is the owner of the house?" I whispered, "I don't know." He asked me where the owner's bedroom is, and I shakily said, "Upstairs." He had me lead him upstairs with a gun to my back, threatening to shoot me if I made any sudden moves or calls for help. When I got to the top of the stairs, I realized there were 2 men behind me, not just one. Both of them were in the same all-black robbery attire. I really didn't want to, but I led them to George's room where he was passed out sleeping. The 2 men shut the bedroom door and had me wake George up without making a commotion. George came to reality, looking around the room and momentarily freaking out before one of the men got closer to him with the gun in his face, telling him to be quiet. The man with the gun pointed at George demanded to know where the safe was. George's family is loaded, and their house is huge along with their boat, and it's common for rich families to have a safe somewhere in the house. George led the 2 men and myself to his dad's room, to a certain closet. At this point, they forced him to call his dad to get the combination. George explained to his dad that we were being held at gunpoint and he needed to give the combination. George's dad complied. The 2 men took all the contents inside the safe and put them into a bag. This included savings bonds, cash, jewelry, and various important documents. After this, they ran out of the house. We didn't hear a car speed away or anything, so they must have had a getaway vehicle further away, not on the block. After posting on multiple outlets, including the Ring Neighbors feature and reporting it to local news outlets, no one could identify the two men. I think it's fairly safe to say those men on the boat followed us to find out where George lived, since it was a very nice boat and they must have seen potential dollar signs. I'd never been so scared in my life. I actually could have been killed if I made one wrong move. My husband Jack is in the military. We have generally lived on base at every station we have been to because the surrounding towns can be very crime-ridden and sketchy, and with my husband gone most of the time, the extra security is appreciated. I work from home due to us moving so often. One afternoon, I was taking a break, had made a bite to eat, and was snuggling up on the couch with my dog. That's when I heard the sliding glass door open. It was so nonchalant I thought it was Jack. I saw the cat run from the kitchen and a shadow standing near the door entering it. I thought maybe he had come back for something, so I called out for him and was like, "What are you doing home? Did you forget something?" No answer. This is where I just got an eerie feeling. After I asked what he was doing here, I saw the shadow move and heard the click of the sliding door lock. From there, he walked to the laundry room and shut the door. I still had received no response, so I'm sitting on the couch, scared out of my mind, and I call my husband, hoping to hear his phone in the laundry room. I don't hear a ring, but he does answer. I asked him why he came home, and he didn't answer me. All he says is, "That wasn't me. Grab the dog and get in your car." I freak out. After getting off the phone with Jack, I grab the dog and run to my car. From there, I called the military police. Waiting for them was probably the longest 20 minutes of my life. When they got there, they cleared the house and found no one. They asked me to make a statement, and even they were baffled that someone would try this on a base. We still live here. I'm just so scared that he'll come back. My younger brother and I have childhood friends that go to the beach with our moms for Memorial Day weekend every year. We've been doing this since before my younger brother was born. On our trip about 2 years ago, we had just arrived at the condo complex that we were staying at and had begun to unpack. We were on the first floor, so only 2 flights of stairs to get to our condo. There was some kind of construction happening a few floors above us, so there were trucks and workers. We had finally finished unpacking our stuff, and we were headed down to the beach when I remembered that I left my purse in the car. My mom gave me the keys, and they went down to the beach while I went to the car to grab my purse. But while I was getting it, an old pickup truck pulled into the parking lot, and an older man got out. He had paint on his shorts, so I figured he was a worker. But me, at the time being a teenage semi-petite girl, kept my eye on him. I got my purse, locked the car, and then started heading back to the stairs. I should also mention that the stairs were outside, open for everyone to see. The man started following me up the stairs, but he was several steps behind me. I figured he was headed up to the construction area, so I gave him the benefit of the doubt. Nevertheless, I started walking faster, and when I glanced behind me, the man was only 2 steps behind. This is when I really started to panic. I only had car keys and a purse on me, and I didn't know the layout of the condo yet. Where was the knife block? Was the door to the beach open? I finally reached the door to the condo, ran inside, and tried to close it behind me. The man was at the door and was trying to force it open as I was trying to force it closed. I finally just tried to run for it, hoping the sliding door to the balcony and beach was open. Luckily, my mom and my friend were still inside because they forgot to bring sunscreen down. I ran behind them, and the man just stood in the doorway. "Can we help you?" my mom asked. The man awkwardly smiled and mumbled something about looking for supplies and abruptly closed the door. After I calmed down, we went back to the parking lot, and his car was gone. I'm confident that the man thought I was going to be alone in that condo with him, and I don't like to think about what could have happened if my mom and friend weren't there. Up until about a year ago, I worked at a grocery chain. I was, and still am, a working college student. My availability was only 6 p.m. to closing, which in this case was midnight. It wasn't my favorite job. I dealt with a lot of annoying customers and coworkers, one of whom once broke into my locker and put a used tampon in the pocket of my apron, but that's a whole different story. My job was walking distance from where I lived, which made it really convenient since I didn't have a car. One Friday night, I was closing as usual with my supervisor, and we were running later than we usually did. My supervisor and I finally got the remaining customers out of the store, clocked out, and left. I left before my supervisor and began walking home. After a long, frustrating day of annoying customers, it felt great to just walk through the fresh winter air. I spent a few minutes shuffling through my phone's playlist to find a song to walk home to. I had made my way down the main road, careful not to slip on any of the ice. One thing that's really important to know about me is that I'm a very anxious person, and while it's definitely a problem most of the time, it does help make me constantly aware of my surroundings. That's when I saw an approaching car slowing down on the deserted main road, and I automatically went on high alert. It was a black car that came to a slow stop against the sidewalk I was on, about 10 feet behind me. I immediately clutched my phone in my hand and brought it out of my pocket. If there wasn't any ice covering the sidewalk and my feet didn't hurt, I probably would have run. Instead, I opted to try and pretend that I wasn't afraid, which I don't think worked because I picked up my pace after the car stopped. It was then that I heard a man's voice call out to me. "Hey, it's cold out here. You want a ride?" the man said. I kept walking away from him up the street, pretending I didn't hear him and just hoping he would go away. It didn't work. A few moments later, I heard the car tires crushing the ice on the road and then turned around to see what he was doing. He was now driving with the car in reverse. When he caught up to me, he had rolled down the passenger seat window some more. He was a black man, maybe in his mid to late 30s. He looked at me and I stopped, prompting him to stop his car as well. "Hey, let me give you a ride," he said through the car window. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to be polite because even though I was scared, I tried to be rational. All he did was offer a girl a ride home who was walking in the cold at night. Also, with the possibility of him being a kidnapper or a rapist, it was really best not to piss him off on the empty street. "No thank you," I said politely but firmly that I hesitated for a second. I was trying to figure out what to say that would get him to leave me alone away which street I lived on. "I'm okay," I insisted. "Thanks, though." As I finished thanking him, I started walking again, now putting both headphones in with the song paused. It was more of a way to signal that I was done talking to him. He didn't say anything, but I knew that he was watching me walk away. I felt relieved when I got a few more feet away from his car and heard the sound of his tires driving away. Unfortunately, the situation was only getting worse. As I started walking past the entrance of a car dealership, I saw the same car making a U-turn in the middle of the street out of the corner of my eye. When I turned slightly, he pulled up to the sidewalk yet again, this time a few feet in front of me. The man then opened the driver's seat door and got out of the car. It was at that point I was actually afraid I wouldn't make it home that night. He looked at me with this weird expression on his face. He had this really focused look while trying to look casual. It's really hard to describe. He started walking up to me. This kind of situation had never happened to me before, but I always thought of dangerous hypothetical situations in my head. I guess thinking about those situations prepared me to an extent, because before I even realized it, my phone was already against my ear like I was on the phone with someone, even though I wasn't. When he came closer to me, he saw my phone in my hand and must have realized someone could know where I am right now, or I could be calling 911. That's the only explanation I can think of, because when he looked at my phone, his demeanor totally changed. He stopped in his tracks with a worried look on his face and then asked me, "Oh, are you on the phone with someone right now?" I replied, looking at him with my phone still against my face and my other hand casually in my pocket. Without saying anything else, the man immediately turned around, got back in his car, and then started to drive up the street. I walked slowly at first, letting some distance grow between us, but as soon as I felt safer, I walked up the street as fast as I could without slipping. I frantically tried to call my dad, who I thought was home at the time. He didn't pick up. I then tried to call my sister and my fiancé. I didn't feel like I was in danger anymore, but my adrenaline was through the roof and I wanted to hear from someone who would make me feel better. I gave up calling after I couldn't get in touch with anyone and just kept walking. I was finally getting ready to turn onto another street when I passed an empty parking lot and saw the same man leaning against his car looking over at me. "Hey," was all he said in a flat tone when I walked by. At this point, I was completely freaked out. I didn't have my phone out anymore, so I couldn't pretend I was talking to someone again, and I was also significantly closer to my house. If he decided to get into his car and follow me, there wasn't any detour I could take to try and lose him. I was now on the verge of tears, and that's when I decided to call 911. I called 911 and told them the situation. The officer on the other line stayed on the phone with me until I got into my house. After that, an officer came to my house and asked me a bunch of questions about the man. He also asked me about his car and where I last saw him. All of the details were either too vague or I didn't remember. He said that he would at least patrol the area for him. I'm not really sure if he actually did or not, but it made me feel better at the time. From that point, I needed a ride to and from work every shift until I got my schedule changed to day shifts. Just a few weeks later, the college semester ended and I was planning on skipping a semester anyway. That experience only reinforced my decision. The more I think about that situation, the more I realize how lucky I was. I was in the perfect position to be taken, but I actually used some quick thinking that really de-escalated the situation. I moved in with my fiancé, and now I have a pocket knife and pepper spray for whenever I walk home at night from my new job. It's something to remember. If you haven't called 911, if you don't have anything to defend yourself against someone, either let someone know where you are or pretend that they know where you are. It can potentially save your life. As a child growing up in a small town nestled among dense woods, I often found myself drawn to the mysterious allure of the forest. But what I encountered there on one fateful day would haunt me for years to come. It was a warm summer afternoon, and my friends and I had decided to explore the woods behind our neighborhood. Armed with nothing but our youthful curiosity and a sense of adventure, we ventured deeper into the heart of the forest, eager to uncover its secrets. As we wandered among the towering trees and tangled undergrowth, a sense of unease began to creep over me. The air grew still, and the sounds of bird song and rustling leaves were replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to hang heavy in the air. Ignoring my growing sense of dread, I pressed on, determined to uncover the truth behind the whispers that seemed to echo through the trees. But as we reached a clearing in the forest, the source of the whispers became clear. A dilapidated old house hidden among the trees like a forgotten relic of the past. As we approached the house, a chill ran down my spine, and I felt a wave of terror wash over me. The air was thick with a sense of malevolence, and the shadows seemed to dance with a life of their own. With trembling hands, I pushed open the creaking door and stepped into the darkness beyond. What I found inside would stay with me for the rest of my life. A room filled with decaying furniture and cobweb-covered relics of a bygone era. But it was what lay at the center of the room that filled me with terror. A child's doll, its eyes wide with a look of pure malevolence. And as I stared into those lifeless eyes, I felt a presence watching me from the shadows. A presence that seemed to hunger for something far more sinister than mere flesh and blood. With a cry of terror, I fled from the house, my friends close behind me. But even as we ran, I could still hear the whispers echoing through the woods, a chilling reminder of the horrors that lurked within. To this day, I cannot shake the feeling that something evil dwells within those woods, something ancient and malevolent that preys on the innocent and the unsuspecting. And though I have long since left that small town behind, the memory of that day will haunt me forever, a reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the edge of our reality. My dad has been an MTA Transit subway station manager for 35 years. With this job, there has to be a manager on duty at all times, so he's practically done every single possible shift throughout his career. That means he's done his fair share of night shifts. Most trains were completely empty throughout the night. He said it was the only nice part about doing the night shift. He has a series of funny and weird night shift stories to tell, but there's one downright horrifying one. My dad had just boarded the train to move to his office at another station. He was alone when he got on, which was at about 2 o'clock in the morning. At the next station, someone boarded. My dad describes him as a white, tall, and skinny man wearing a heavy jacket and beanie. He shot my dad a quick glance before sitting in the farthest corner away from him. My dad said that he felt uncomfortable as the guy kept looking up at him every so often. When my dad's stop came, he got off, as well as the other man. He walked to his office door, unlocked it, and looked behind him. The man in the jacket was pacing around only about 50 feet away. My dad stepped into his office, shut the door, locked it, and sat at his desk. 5 minutes later, someone started to try and turn the doorknob. After the person on the other side of the door realized it was locked, they started to knock softly. My dad called out, "Who is it?" and they responded, "I want to talk." He told whoever it was to go away. He says he knew trouble when he saw it. He had a good feeling it was the guy from the train, as this station at a time like this was apparently always completely empty. My dad told the guy to go away. He continued to knock for a good 5 minutes. My dad finally pulled up the security camera screens and brought up the camera pointed at his office door. Sure enough, it was the guy from the train, wearing the jacket and beanie. Coincidentally, as soon as my dad brought up the camera, the man walked away. So, my dad did whatever his work consisted of for about half an hour in that office before leaving to catch the next train. He checked the camera to make sure that the weird guy wasn't out there. He locked up and walked down the stairs to the train platform, where he got on the train right away. Looking out the window, He saw the guy from before walking down the stairs to the platform and then stepping on the train into the same car as my dad. He sat down on the opposite side, a few seats to the right. My dad tried to look away and pretend not to notice him, but he knew the guy was staring at him. He at one point gave in and stared back, giving a slight nod and smile in some sort of truce attempt before looking away again. The man stared at my dad the whole ride to the next station, but my dad never looked back at him once after the first time. Now, you may be asking, why didn't he try to forcibly get the guy to back off? Well, despite my dad's intimidating size, he's always been a complete teddy bear, no bark and no bite. Plus, he says he feared that the guy was armed and that one small motion could lead to death. When the train stopped at the station, my dad practically ran all the way back up to the streets, constantly glancing over his shoulder. And yes, the man from the train was following him. My dad had to find the first public building still open to try and escape. He found a Wendy's that was open and stepped inside. He sat and watched as the guy following him walked up to the window, stopped, and stared my dad down through the glass for about 10 seconds before turning around and walking across the street and then down the sidewalk. My dad said he ate, waited a little longer, then left the Wendy's to get to his third and final station for the night. The scariest part, when my dad was in his third office, as he was checking the security cameras out of paranoia of the situation, he caught the guy from the train pacing around the outside only about 30 feet from his office. He then stopped, looked up at the camera, and, according to my dad, literally froze and stared for no less than a minute. When he finally lowered his head, he walked away out of the station to never be seen by my dad again. My dad doesn't know if he was followed after leaving the Wendy's, but that would only make sense. The guy was clearly disturbed, possibly homeless, or dangerous. Who knows what he actually wanted with my dad? So recently, I had an experience while I was at a friend's house alone, watching his dog, that inspired me to do another Home Alone themed video. I spent so much time reading stories of people's horrific experiences that I forget these things could happen to me too. In a bit of a different fashion, I'll tell that experience I had after the viewer submitted stories at the end of the video. A more positive experience I would also like to talk about is my experience with Scentbird, a fragrance subscription service that allows you to choose new designer fragrances to try out every month at an affordable price. You get to try the first fragrance from Scentbird for only $8, and your next month will be only $16.95. The vials are cheaper than a lot of the rollerballs or travel sizes you'll find elsewhere. Scentbird is a great solution for beginners in fragrance looking to experiment with certain scents. Scentbird allows you to try different designer fragrances from brands like Prada, Gucci, and Versace with a 30-day supply of any fragrance you choose. This way, if you're just getting into building your fragrance collection, you can test out what you like and what you don't without having to purchase a full bottle. Through Scentbird, I found my favorite scents, Eros Flame by Versace, which mixes Italian lemon, pink pepper, and vetiver for a classier scent, and Cross River Gorilla by Sanctuary for a more casual scent. So if you're looking to start your own collection, head on over to Scentbird by scanning my QR code using code 55nightmare to get 55% off your first month at Scentbird. Growing up, I was raised in rural Michigan. There was hardly anything to do. If you like staring at trees and crops and lots of alone time, that was the place to be. I got out of there as soon as I got a car and enough money to move. I'm not a nature hater or anything, but I'd pick being by a big city any day. My parents don't own that property anymore. They sold it 5 years ago. But to describe it, it was a 3-acre property. The house itself was pretty big, and there was a storage building out back. I was 13 when this happened. My parents would leave me alone often at this age. They trusted me because I matured at a young age and I had responsibilities on the property. It was a weekend, and I was playing Vice City on my PS2 in the living room when suddenly, a loud metallic bang came from outside somewhere in the yard. I right away ran to every window I could to look outside to see if I could see something, and I didn't see anything until I got to the window looking out the storage building out back. The door to it was completely open. I went immediately to grab the rifle from the closet and go outside. I made my presence known, shouting, "Who's in there?" to no avail. When I got to the door, I made it known I had a gun before looking inside. There was a bunch of stuff in there, from the sit-down mower to the quad to infinite little lawn care items. Someone could have been hiding behind any of that stuff. Even as a kid, I didn't scare easily, but at that moment, I got really unsettled. So I closed the door to the building and went back inside the house. I locked the door and then sat at the window for the longest time, watching the storage building, expecting the door to open at any second. That door was heavy and impossible to just open by itself. It was simply a fact that someone came and opened it. Whether they were still inside of the building, I wasn't sure. I decided to go call my dad and ask his opinion. I went to the kitchen to the landline phone and called my dad's cell phone. He didn't pick up, so I left a voicemail. This was back when you'd still have to leave someone a voicemail because texting wasn't mainstream. After that, I went back to sitting next to the window, but now I put on a TV show in the background to make this less monotonous. I took the phone with me. I was probably about to give up when I heard creaks from upstairs. My heart was now in my throat. I had to ask myself the big question, was I working myself up or was someone here? I had a serious guard dog mentality. Even if I didn't love that place, I saw it as mine, my family's. I had to protect it, but I was in over my head. I grabbed the rifle again and walked upstairs. I didn't say anything. Calling out would only make a potential intruder know that I heard them. I made it to the top of the stairs and I turned on the light for the upstairs hallway. There were 5 doors to open, all of them closed. 4 led to bedrooms, 1 led to the bathroom. Each door had a decently large crack underneath that would allow you to see looking out the crack under the door where the creak in the ceiling came from the side of the house my parents' bedroom was on. I got down on my knees and looked under the crack of the door. I saw 2 bare feet facing the other side of the door. I felt my stomach twist into a knot. The reality of the situation just became so much more real, and I realized I wasn't ready to threaten or, God forbid, shoot someone. I got up and quickly went downstairs, hiding in the bathroom to call my dad. He still didn't pick up. I left another voicemail and then called again and again. He never picked up. He must have had his phone set down somewhere. I finally called 911, as I should have done right away, and I whispered into the phone the whole time, detailing exactly what was taking place. I was told to sit tight in the bathroom and not say a word. I heard footsteps coming down the stairs, and then they approached the bathroom door as if whoever it was somehow knew I went straight to the bathroom. The footsteps stopped outside the door, and there was a brief pause before a deep voice said, "What's up, kid?" I still remember the voice and those words so vividly. If I heard that voice today, I'd still recognize it immediately. I almost wanted to cry, that's how scared I was. I disobeyed what the operator told me and spoke. I said loud and clear, "I'm on the phone with the cops right now, and I have a gun." I put the operator on speaker as she was asking me if everything was okay. The man attempted to open the door, and when he realized it was locked, I heard him walk away. I heard the footsteps fade to silence, and then the sound of a door slamming. It was the sound of the back door, I'm sure. I breathed a sigh of relief, and from there on, I waited for the police to arrive. When they did, I felt like £1,000,000 had just lifted off my shoulders. After a thorough inspection of the house, inside and out, confirming that the man was gone, they asked if there was anywhere else I could stay that night, and I said yes, my uncle's house. We contacted my uncle, who came and spoke with the police, then he took me back to his place. The thing that haunts me the most is that it was my fault. I could have prevented this. I left the door unlocked as I went to the storage building to investigate. Clearly, that's when the man simply walked right into the house. Even with a rifle in my hands, I didn't feel safe at all. It was truly the most horrific experience of my life. I was home alone one night for a reason I don't remember. All I remember is my entire family was gone. I was 13 or 14 years old. I was a big gamer at the time. I was obsessed with StarCraft, and admittedly sometimes spend a weekend night or two playing StarCraft or some other PC game. This was right before co-lockdown started. I was playing StarCraft on my computer in my bedroom on the first floor. That's when the doorbell rang twice. I hurried to the door, not wanting to be away from the game for too long, in fear of losing. I got to the front door and said, "Who is it?" as I always would if I was alone. A soft and weak voice on the other side said something that I couldn't hear. It sounded like a woman. I opened the door with the storm door still separating me and this older woman standing on the other side with a big smile on her face. She had her hands behind her back. I said through the door, "Can I help you?" She said she needed to use a phone and asked if she could come inside. Ever since I was a little kid, I was always taught not to let a stranger into the house, ever. That included women. I felt so awkward, though. I didn't know how to turn her away. I redirected her to the library a few blocks down because they'd surely have a phone. Deep down, I knew the library was closed at this point, but I was just trying to get this stranger who was trying to get into my house to leave. She was still smiling, but what she said next did not match her smile. She said, "That's very rude to turn away an old lady asking for help." I replied the only way I could think to, and that was that my parents don't allow strangers into the house. It's a house rule. I slowly started closing the door as I was saying sorry, and she just stood there, not moving, but still smiling at me. And though her smile never changed, it suddenly felt much more menacing. I was walking back to my room when the doorbell rang again. There was no way in hell I was opening the door again. That woman radiated weird vibes from the start. Maybe something was wrong with her. Maybe she wasn't all there. These were things I had no way of knowing, and maybe that was selfish of me to send her on her way, but I just wasn't opening the door for anyone when I was home alone. I went back to my game, not too long after I sat back down. I heard something tapping on the window. It was a clinking type sound from something metal. The window was directly in front of my desk. I had the blind pulled down, so I couldn't see what was making the noise, but I already had an idea. My room was the only room with a light on in the house. The horrible thought that it was the old woman from just before, and that she walked over to my window, terrified me. I turned off the sound on my computer at this point. I didn't care about my game anymore. The clanking sound on the window persisted. I basically said, "F this," and up and left to a different room in the house. I sat in the darkness of the living room for a bit. When the doorbell rang again, this woman was harassing me now. I tried to convince myself she wasn't a threat, just some crazy old woman who's probably clueless as to where she is. When she rang the doorbell a second and third time, I decided to go open the door and ask her if there's someone I could call for her, but when I opened the door there was now a man on the other side. He looked to be about 10 years younger than her. He said through the storm door, "Have you seen my mother?" I replied saying yes, she came to my door just before. He then apologized to me and said she has dementia and got out of the house. I suddenly felt bad, but he asked me if he could come in for a minute. And again, I felt awkward. Why did he need to come inside? I said the same thing that I told to the woman who he claimed to be his mother. I said we could just talk through this door. I then said that I think she went into my backyard because I heard something at my window. I told him he could go around back and check. He thanked me and walked down the walkway, and I thought he went into the backyard, but when I went to the back and looked out the back window expecting to see him searching around, I saw nobody, not him or his mom. This was all too weird for me. I went to bed on the earlier side that night, just falling asleep with the TV on in the background until I heard the clear blinking sound on the window again. Something metal was tapping on the glass. I remembered the concerned man and I decided to try and help. I went to the window, lifted the blind up with my hand, and I saw that woman outside my window with that same creepy smile. She was tapping a kitchen knife on my window. I closed the blind and crawled back into my bed. This didn't feel like it was actually happening. A suspiciously short amount of time later, the doorbell rang like 4 times. The clinking onto the window stopped by this point. This was all too suspicious. It felt like some kind of robbery attempt. I ignored the doorbell. I stayed in my bed. I was going to wait this out. I didn't have a cell phone at this time. I wasn't the most social guy growing up. I also didn't want to call the police for some reason. I waited this all out until it finally stopped. The next morning I told my dad what happened. When I called him, he told me I was smart not to open the door. Everyone agreed that everything about it sounded like an attempted robbery. Is there a chance that maybe that woman really did have dementia and that the man was really her concerned son? Maybe. But it all seemed too coordinated. Why did he want to come into the house too? How did he even know she came to my house specifically? Why didn't he ever go into the backyard to look for her when I gave him permission to do so? Too many unanswered questions that lead me to believe I avoided something terrible happening if I opened that door.